What do you do when the life you've built crumbles in an instant and the person you loved becomes someone unrecognizable? Stay tuned to discover how Rowan faces the unraveling of her world, how she gathers the pieces of herself, and how she begins a journey toward freedom, no longer running from the past, but ready to confront whatever lies ahead. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience, growth, and finding the courage to move forward. The soft hum of jazz filled the air, the flickering candlelight casting a warm glow over the pristine white tablecloth. Our 10th anniversary dinner was meant to be a celebration, a milestone in the life Blaine and I had carefully built together. I wore the red silk dress he always said was his favorite, the one that mirrored the rich color of the wine he adored pouring into my glass. "This vintage is worth savoring," he'd always say, and I trusted him, believing in the romanticism of it all. But that night, something felt amiss. The restaurant was magnificent, marble floors, chandeliers twinkling like stars in the night. Yet Blaine seemed distant, his gaze wandering around the room instead of resting on me. I tried to push away the growing discomfort, convincing myself that he was simply exhausted. His job as a corporate lawyer was demanding, and lately he'd been under a great deal of pressure. "You look stunning," he finally said, his eyes meeting mine for just a moment, but the smile never reached them. "Thank you," I replied, my voice softer than I meant. I longed to feel the warmth in his words, but the weight in my chest refused to lift. The waiter arrived with our appetizers, and as we clinked glasses, I tried to ignore the unease creeping in. "To us," I said, hoping to rekindle some spark. "To us," he echoed, his voice flat. The rest of the meal passed in an uneasy silence. Blaine had been unusually quiet, absent-mindedly pushing his food around his plate rather than eating it. "Is everything okay?" I finally asked, unable to bear the tension anymore. He looked up, as if startled by my question, as if he'd forgotten I was even there. "What? Yeah, fine. Everything's fine," he muttered. But I could feel the lie hanging in the air. But it wasn't fine. I could sense it in the stillness between us, a space too wide to ignore. "Blaine, talk to me." "If something's wrong, we can talk about it." "You always do this," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to slice through the ambient music. I froze, the words hanging between us like a heavy weight. "Do what?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Ruin the moment," he said, leaning back in his chair, crossing his arms as if to shield himself from me. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "I'm not trying to ruin anything. I just want to understand what's going on." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Of course you do. You always need to understand, to control everything." Before I could respond, the waiter arrived with our entrees, his cheerful "Bon appétit" slicing through the tension like a knife. I managed a forced smile, muttering a quick thanks, praying he didn't notice the strain in my voice. As soon as the waiter left, Blaine reached for his glass of wine. He took a long sip, setting the glass down with a deliberate clink. "You know what your problem is, Rowan?" he said, his voice low but laced with venom. My heart pounded in my chest. "What are you talking about?" "You think you're better than everyone else. Always the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, the perfect everything." His words hit me like a slap. "That's not true," I said, my voice trembling. "Isn't it?" he said, leaning forward now, his eyes boring into mine. "Maybe if you spent less time trying to be perfect and more time being real, we wouldn't be sitting here pretending everything's fine when it's not." Before I could respond, he picked up his glass of wine and in one swift motion, tipped it forward, letting the dark red liquid cascade over me. Gasps echoed from nearby tables as the wine soaked into my dress, staining the vibrant silk a deep, angry crimson. I sat there stunned, the world around me a blur. Blaine leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smirk on his face. "Happy anniversary," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I couldn't move. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my reaction. My cheeks burned, not from the wine, but from the humiliation. I looked down at the ruined dress I had chosen so carefully for this night. Blaine didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, cool as ice, as though this was just another day for him. My throat tightened, my pulse roaring in my ears. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand an explanation, but all I managed was a shaky breath. As I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. "I'm leaving," I whispered, my voice barely audible but firm enough to signal that I wouldn't stay and let him break me. "Of course you are," he muttered, taking another sip of his wine. I turned and walked away, my steps shaky but determined. I didn't stop to look back. I couldn't bear to see the judgment or pity in the eyes of the other diners. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap, but it didn't wash away the shame. I hailed a cab, my hands trembling as I gave the driver my address. When I got home, I peeled off the ruined dress and stood in front of the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, disheveled and vulnerable. The woman I saw wasn't the Rowan I thought I was. "How did it get to this?" I whispered, sinking to the floor. Memories of better days with Blaine flashed through my mind, walking hand in hand through Paris. Him surprising me with breakfast in bed, telling me I was the love of his life. When did that man, the one I cherished, turn into a stranger? My phone buzzed, yanking me back to reality. It was a text from Blaine. "You always make things worse than they are. Maybe next time don't provoke me." Provoke him? The audacity of his words hit me like a slap. I felt my anger flare up again. I threw the phone onto the bed and buried my face in my hands, trying to quiet the storm brewing inside me. The next morning, I woke up to the sharp sunlight cutting through the curtains, my body aching from a restless night. The phone buzzed again this time, a call. Blaine appeared on the screen. My thumb hovered over the decline button. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but curiosity mixed with a surge of anger made me press answer. "What do you want, Blaine?" I asked, my voice tight, almost mechanical. There was a long pause on the other end, then a heavy sigh. "Rowan, we need to talk. It's important." I couldn't stand his games anymore. "Talk about what? How you humiliated me in front of an entire restaurant? Or how you've turned into someone I don't even recognize?" He was quiet for a beat, then replied with a tone I couldn't quite place, serious and almost desperate. "I'm serious. This isn't about last night. It's about something else. Something you need to know." A shiver ran down my spine. Blaine was a master manipulator, but his tone was different this time, almost vulnerable. "What is it?" I asked, the anger now replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. Another long pause, heavier this time, before he spoke. "It's about the money, Rowan, and the people I owe it to." My heart dropped. "What are you talking about?" "I've been keeping secrets," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "And last night was my way of trying to push you away because if you stay, you're in danger." The words hung in the air like a weight, suffocating me. "Danger?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "What kind of danger, Blaine? What have you done?" His silence filled the space between us, deafening. It felt like he was weighing how much to reveal. "Rowan, it's complicated," he finally said, his voice flat. "No," I snapped, the fury returning. "It's not complicated. You humiliated me last night and now you're telling me I'm in danger without explaining anything? You don't get to drop a bombshell like that and then stay vague. Talk!" I could hear him exhale sharply, almost a hiss of frustration. "I borrowed money, okay? A lot of it from people you don't want to know. They're not the kind of people you can just pay back and walk away from." My stomach twisted. "What does this have to do with me?" "I used the house as collateral," he confessed, his voice trembling. "And now they're coming for it, and maybe for more." The room spun, my mind struggling to process what he just said. "The house?" I whispered, my voice hollow. "You used our home, my home, for your debts? It wasn't supposed to go this far," he said quickly, desperation creeping into his tone. "I thought I could pay it back. I thought I'd fix it before you ever found out." "But you didn't, did you?" I shot back, my anger burning hotter now. "Instead, you've dragged me into your mess. Do you even realize what you've done?" "I do," he said, almost pleading. "And that's why I tried to push you away. I wanted you to leave me, Rowan. I wanted you to be safe." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and foreign. "Safe? Do you think pouring wine on me in public and treating me like garbage would make me safe? You're unbelievable, Blaine." He didn't respond, and the silence on the line felt like a void threatening to swallow me whole. I ended the call and stared at the phone in my hand, my mind racing. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. It wasn't just about a marriage falling apart. This was about survival. I thought about calling someone, maybe my best friend Rin, but how could I even begin to explain this? Instead, I did what I always did when life threw me a curveball. I started digging. I opened my laptop and began searching for anything that could help me understand what Blaine had gotten us into. Bank statements, emails, anything. It didn't take long to find the trail. Large, suspicious withdrawals, payments to accounts with cryptic name, and then, buried in his emails, I found the first real clue. A message from someone named Cyrus Kane. Subject, final notice. "Blaine, your time is up. Pay what you owe or we'll take what you promised. And don't think we won't come for more if it's not enough." A chill ran down my spine. The message was dated a week ago. Who was Cyrus Kane, and what did he mean by more? I didn't have time to wonder. A loud knock on the front door jolted me out of my thoughts. My heart leaped into my throat. It was barely 9:00 a.m. Who could it be? I crept to the window and peeked through the curtains. Two men in dark suits stood on the porch, their faces impassive but menacing. They knocked again, harder this time. "Mrs. Parker," one of them called out, his voice sharp and commanding. "We know you're in there. We just want to talk." Talk? Every instinct in my body screamed, "Don't open the door!" I grabbed my phone and backed away, my mind racing. Who were these men, and how far was Blaine's debt going to reach into my life? As I stood there, trembling and uncertain, my phone buzzed with another call. Blaine again. I didn't answer. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. My legs moved before my mind could catch up. I grabbed my purse and threw on a coat, not even bothering to change out of the sweatpants I'd slept in. I needed to get out of the house, away from those men, away from Blaine's chaos. I slipped through the kitchen and out into the backyard, the frosty morning air stinging my cheeks. I crouched low and crept along the side of the house, avoiding the windows. My heart pounded with every step, each knock on the front door echoing like a drumbeat in my head. "Mrs. Parker, we won't ask again!" one of the men bellowed. I didn't stick around to hear what would happen if I didn't answer. I made it to the alley behind our house and flagged down a cab. "Where to?" the driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I hesitated. Where could I go? The home was no longer safe, and I couldn't risk involving anyone I cared about. "Just drive," I said, my voice trembling. The cab pulled away, and I sank into the seat, my mind racing. I needed a plan, a way to get ahead of this. I ended up at a small coffee shop on the edge of town, where no one would think to look for me. I sat in the corner with a cup of tea I didn't touch, scrolling through Blaine's emails again. The name, Cyrus Kane, was like a dark cloud looming over every message. Payment deadlines, threats, warnings. Who was this man, and why did he feel entitled to our house? My house. My phone buzzed on the table, and I almost jumped out of my seat. It was a text from Rin. "Hey, everything okay? I just saw two guys outside your house, looked serious. Call me." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Should I tell her? Could I risk dragging her into this? Before I could decide, another text came through. This one was from an unknown number. "Running won't help you, Mrs. Parker. We always find what's ours. M." My blood turned to ice. How did they get my number? How did they know I'd left? I deleted the message, my hands shaking. If they thought they could intimidate me, they were wrong. I knew I couldn't keep running. If Blaine had brought this chaos into my life, then he owed me answers. I called him and he picked up on the first ring. "Rowan," he said, relief flooding his voice. "Thank God. Where are you?" "Not important," I said curtly. "I need you to tell me everything, Blaine. No more half-truths, no more games. Who is Cyrus Kane?" He hesitated. "He's not someone you want to cross. He's a loan shark, Rowan, one of the most dangerous in the city. I borrowed money from him to cover some investments." "What kind of investments?" I demanded. The risky ones, he admitted. I thought they'd pay off big. I was trying to secure our future, Rowan. I wanted to give us everything we ever dreamed of. Well, congratulations, I snapped. You've given us a nightmare instead. Listen, he said, his voice desperate. I can fix this. I just need more time. Time for what? I shot back. To drag me further into your mess? To let these men ruin what's left of my life? Rowan, please, he pleaded. I know I screwed up, but you have to trust me. I'll fix this. I laughed bitterly. Trust you? After everything you've done? He didn't respond, and the silence told me everything I needed to know. I'm done, Blaine, I said firmly. I'm done cleaning up your messes and pretending everything's fine. You're on your own. Rowan, wait! I ended the call and immediately turned off my phone, feeling a strange sense of clarity flood over me for the first time in years. Blaine had put me in this position, but I refused to let him drag me down with him any longer. I didn't know exactly what my next move would be, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to be a victim. I would fight back, and if Cyrus Kane thought he could take everything from me, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The next few hours were a blur, my mind spinning as I tried to think of every possible scenario. I needed to make a plan, something concrete. I couldn't sit idly by, waiting to be hunted down by strangers who could tear my life apart without a second thought. But there was one thing I knew for sure. Blaine wasn't coming to save me. I took a deep breath and forced myself to focus. The first thing I needed to do was gather information. I had to find out everything about Cyrus Kane, the man who had been pulling the strings in Blaine's life. I went to a public library, hoping to get some quiet while I dove into the criminal underworld. I used every resource I could find, old news articles, online forums, anything that could give me a glimpse into Kane's world. It didn't take long before I found the first mention of him. Cyrus Kane wasn't just a loan shark. He was a kingpin, the head of an underground empire dealing in weapons, drugs, and illicit business. He was the kind of man you didn't say no to, the kind who made sure people paid, one way or another. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I read more. Blaine had gotten himself tangled up in something far bigger than I had ever imagined. The loan he had taken out was just the surface. Kane was notorious for collecting debts in violent and destructive ways, and now I was involved, whether I liked it or not. I slammed my laptop shut, startling a couple of people nearby. I had my next move. I didn't have time to waste. I needed to confront Cyrus Kane myself. I drove across town to a rundown building, a place that reeked of desperation. It was the kind of place no one entered unless they had no choice. A place where secrets were made and lives were ruined. I parked a block away, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but I knew I couldn't back down now. The moment I stepped into the building, the smell of stale alcohol and cigarettes hit me. The air was thick with tension. Men in dark suits lounged around, their eyes flicking over me as I walked past them. I kept my head high, ignoring their stares, and made my way down a narrow hallway. At the end of it stood a solid door. I knocked 3 times, each rap echoing through the silence. A voice called out from inside, "Come in!" I pushed open the door and stepped into the dimly lit room. Behind a desk sat Cyrus Kane. He was tall, his dark eyes calculating and sharp. As soon as I entered, his gaze locked onto me, like he was sizing me up. "You must be Rowan Parker," he said, his voice smooth but cold, sending a chill down my spine. I didn't flinch. "I'm here to talk about Blaine," I said, walking forward. "And about the debt you've been collecting." Cyrus raised an eyebrow. "You're a brave woman," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Most would have run by now, but I can respect someone who faces their problems head on." "I'm not here for your respect," I snapped. "I'm here because I want answers. I want you to tell me exactly what's going on. What kind of deal did Blaine make with you, and why do I have to pay for it?" Cyrus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "Blaine Parker is a fool," he said calmly. "He thought he could play in the big leagues, take out loans and make investments without understanding the consequences. I gave him what he wanted, but now he isn't paying the price, and you, Mrs. Parker, are caught in the middle." My heart pounded, but I held my ground. "What do you want from me?" He smiled, a cold, cruel grin that sent a chill down my spine. "What I want is for you to understand something very important. Blaine has nothing left but you. You still have something worth taking." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "You're not just his wife," Cyrus said, standing up and walking around the desk. "You're his last asset, the house, the car, the savings. You see, when someone doesn't pay their debts, I take what's theirs, and now I'm looking at you, Rowan. You're the key to fixing all of this." A sudden wave of panic crashed over me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't show him fear, not now. "You think I'll just hand everything over to you?" I asked, my voice low but steady. "You think I'm going to let you destroy my life like you did Blaine's?" Cyrus's smile widened, his eyes darkening with amusement. "Oh, I'm not asking you to hand anything over, but you have a choice. Help me, and I'll let you walk away with your life. Refuse, and, well, things won't end so nicely for you." The threat hung in the air like poison, but I wasn't backing down. "I'm not your pawn, Cyrus," I said, each word sharp. "You won't break me, and you won't take anything from me. I'll fight you every step of the way." For the first time, Cyrus's expression faltered just for a moment, but I saw it. He wasn't used to people standing up to him, and something about that realization gave me strength. I walked out of that building with a fire burning inside me. The weight of what I had just done, the confrontation, the threats, was almost unbearable, but I wasn't going to let Cyrus Kane or anyone control my life. When I returned home, I knew Blaine would be waiting for me, but things had changed. I wasn't the same woman who had fled in terror a few days ago. The fear that had once controlled me was gone. I wasn't afraid anymore. The house was empty when I stepped inside. The silence weighed heavily on me, like the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for the next part of this twisted story to unfold. Alone with my thoughts, I looked around, but I knew I wouldn't be alone for long. I glanced at my phone, no new messages from Blaine, no calls from Cyrus. It was as if they were both waiting for me to make the first move. But I was done waiting. I had spent too many days letting their threats hang over me, letting their drama dictate my life. Not anymore. I was in control now, and if I was going down, it wasn't going to be because I let someone else pull the strings. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. Cyrus Kane was dangerous, but he wasn't invincible. People like him had weaknesses, and I was going to find them. I spent hours digging into his past. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. Cyrus wasn't as untouchable as he thought. His empire had cracks, loose ends that someone like me could exploit. I found an address, a secondary location tied to Kane's operations, a place he used to store assets and run more of his shady deals. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I knew one thing for sure. This was my chance. I grabbed my coat, leaving the house without a second thought. If Cyrus thought I was just going to roll over and hand everything over, he had another thing coming. The building was a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place you'd drive by without giving it a second glance. But I had studied the blueprints. I knew exactly where I was going. I parked a few blocks away and made my way through the shadows. The entrance was locked, but that wasn't going to stop me. After all these years with Blaine, I had learned my way around security measures. It didn't take long before I was inside. The warehouse was dark, cold, and smelled faintly of metal and dust. My heart pounded in my chest and my adrenaline surged, pushing me forward. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew something was hidden here, something I could use. As I ventured deeper into the maze of crates and storage units, I found it, a small office tucked away in the back, hidden behind a stack of old boxes. It looked temporary, perhaps a meeting room, a place for keeping sensitive things locked away. I didn't hesitate. I pushed open the door. Inside, the room was neat, almost too neat. My eyes immediately fell to the desk, where a stack of files, discarded papers, and right in the center, a locked briefcase sat. I smiled to myself. I didn't know what was inside, but I knew it was important. I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I picked the lock with ease, my hands steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in my head. When the case finally opened, I felt a rush of triumph, but then a cold wave of dread washed over me. Inside were documents, contracts, financial statements, and a few photographs. But it was the last item that made my blood run cold. A ledger, a list of names. My name was scrawled there, neat and precise, in handwriting that belonged to someone too comfortable in this world. And next to it, a number. My stomach twisted. This was it. This was the leverage Kane had on me. The thing he was holding over me and over Blaine. I had no choice but to take it all. I grabbed the ledger and stuffed it into my bag. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I went to a payphone, dialing a number I hadn't called in years. Rin's voice came through immediately. "Rowan?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "Where have you been? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, my voice tight. "I need your help. I need you to meet me." "Anything. Where?" I gave her the address. When she arrived, her eyes widened in surprise as she took in the warehouse. She was worried, but she trusted me. "What are we doing here?" "I'm going to take down Cyrus Kane," I said, my voice steady. "But I need you to do something for me. I need you to help me get the evidence into the right hands." Rin didn't ask questions. She just nodded. She knew how far I'd come to get here. We walked out of the warehouse together, the first glimmers of dawn creeping over the horizon. I still had one final move to make, one last step to free myself from Blaine's mess, from Cyrus's grip, but I wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. With Rin by my side, I felt a sense of strength I hadn't known I'd lost. We made our way to the small, inconspicuous office of a reporter who had earned a reputation for exposing criminal operations. This was my last play. Take the evidence and make sure Cyrus and Blaine couldn't hide behind their lies anymore. As we walked into the office, the walls were lined with old newspaper clippings, all detailing the downfall of powerful people who thought they were untouchable. The man behind the desk, Grady Harrow, looked up when we entered. He was scruffy, with sharp eyes that took in every detail. "You must be Rowan," he said, his voice low and cautious. "What's this about?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I placed the bag containing the ledger, the contracts, and the photographs on the desk between us. "This is my life," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I want Cyrus Kane and Blaine Parker exposed. I want them held accountable for everything they've done. I can't do it alone, but I know you can help." Grady studied me for a moment, his eyes flicking to Rin, then back to me. He didn't speak for a long time, just leaned back in his chair, arms folded. Finally, he spoke. "You're sure about this? Exposing Kane is like throwing yourself into the lion's den. Once this goes public, there's no going back." I didn't flinch. "I'm not going back. I've been living in fear for too long. It ends now." His gaze softened, and he nodded. "All right. I'll make sure this gets to the right people." As we left the office, the weight of everything I had just done began to settle on me. I had just handed over everything I had worked for and fought for, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had taken control. We got in the car and headed back to my house, but my mind was already racing ahead to the next steps. Cyrus and Blaine weren't going to just let this go. The storm was coming, and I had no idea how violent it would be, but I couldn't wait any longer. The call came the next day. I was in my kitchen, sipping coffee, trying to calm my nerves when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I didn't hesitate. I answered it. "Rowan?" The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was Blaine. "Where are you?" he demanded, his voice tight with anger. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice even. "I'm not going to keep hiding, Blaine. I'm done with you. I'm done with the lies, the secrets. You and Cyrus can't control me anymore." "I never meant for this to happen," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "No, you don't get to play the victim now," I snapped. "You put me in this position. You made choices that destroyed everything, and now you want me to clean up your mess? I'm not your damn savior, Blaine. I'm done." There was silence on the other end. I could hear his breathing, heavy and uneven. "Rowan, please, you don't know what you're up against. Kane, he'll hurt you." "I've already been hurt," I replied coldly, "but I'm not afraid of him anymore." "You don't know what he's capable of, what he can do." "I don't care," I said firmly. "You made your choice when you got involved with him. Now I'm making mine." I ended the call. It didn't take long for Cyrus to make his move. 2 days later, I received an unmarked envelope at my doorstep. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was a picture of me standing outside Grady's office, and below it, in bold letters, "This is your last warning. You can't win this war." I was numb, but there was no time for fear. The pieces had already fallen into place. Cyrus had made his threats, and now he was showing his hand. I grabbed the documents from Grady, the photographs, and the ledger, and drove straight to the police station. It was time to end this once and for all. I walked up to the front desk, my heart pounding in my chest. The officer behind the desk looked up at me, surprised to see a woman so determined. "I need to speak to someone in serious crimes," I said. "I've got evidence. I'm ready to bring down Cyrus Kane and Blaine Parker." The officer blinked, then nodded. "Follow me." The next few hours felt like an eternity. The police took the evidence, examined it carefully, and confirmed the severity of the situation. They told me they would handle it from here, that they had enough to launch a full investigation into both Cyrus Kane and Blaine Parker. I walked out of the station with a sense of closure settling over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The storm wasn't over, but I knew it was coming to an end. A week later, Cyrus Kane was arrested. The charges were a litany of things I had never dreamed I would be part of: racketeering, money laundering, illegal arms deals. The police had enough to bring him down for good, and Blaine, his involvement was discovered, but he was too far gone. His empire crumbled under the weight of his own choices. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why Blaine made the decisions he did, or why I let him drag me into his mess for so long, but one thing was clear. I wasn't the woman I was before all of this. I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor, and this time I would be the one to rebuild. As the days passed, I watched from the sidelines as Cyrus's empire collapsed. The police raided his properties, confiscated his assets, and dismantled the vast network that had enslaved so many lives. The news was everywhere, scandals broadcasted across all channels, and I realized just how deep his corruption had run, how many had been affected by his greed and manipulation. I still remember the day Blaine was arrested. It was hard to watch him, handcuffed, being led away with a hollow expression, his face pale and broken. He didn't look at me. I wasn't sure how to feel, whether I should be relieved or heartbroken. I had loved him for years, loved the man I thought he could be, not the one he had turned into. When the news broke, the public was shocked, but I wasn't. I had known Blaine, seen the way he deceived himself, and his ties to Kane weren't just mistakes. They were choices. I couldn't keep pretending I could fix everything he'd broken anymore. The next few months passed in a quiet that was unsettling. It was the kind of silence that was peaceful yet ominous, like the calm before a storm. I took some time for myself, giving my mind space to breathe, to process. I hadn't truly been alone for so long, without the noise of manipulation, the weight of secrets. Alone with my thoughts and feelings, I found myself questioning, what was I supposed to do now? Who was I after everything had fallen apart? The life I had known was gone, but I was still standing, still breathing. And in that, I found a strange sense of victory. Months later, I stood outside a small cafe I'd passed by countless times but never dared to enter. Today, something felt different. I took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and the scent of coffee and fresh pastries enveloped me. The soft murmur of conversations and clinking cups filled the air. Life continued on around me, but in a way, I felt like I was part of it now, not left behind. I found a seat by the window, settled in, and pulled out a notebook. It had been so long since I'd written, but today it felt right. I wasn't worried about the future. I wasn't consumed with thoughts of revenge or trying to fix the past. I was simply living, creating. For the first time in so long, I wasn't afraid of what was to come. The past, with all its pain and betrayal, would never fully leave me. It was a tangled mess I couldn't erase, but it had taught me lessons I couldn't ignore. Lessons about strength, resilience, and knowing who I was, even when everything seemed to fall apart. I had been broken, but I had gathered the pieces, and now I knew no one else could save me. Only I could save myself. As I looked out at the sunset from the cafe window, A small but genuine smile spread across my face. I wasn't the woman I used to be, and that was okay. The journey had been long, the fights hard, but now I was free. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to see what came next. Days passed, and life began to find a new rhythm. But then, one evening as I was walking home from the cafe, I received a text. The number was unknown. The message was simple. "You're not done yet, Rowan. This isn't over." My heart skipped a beat, the familiar weight of dread settling in. Was it Cyrus? Had someone else connected to his network managed to survive? I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the message, the words sinking in. Then, to my surprise, I smiled. I had learned something in the last few months. I wasn't afraid anymore. The past had shown me that I always had a choice. I could let this message control me, or I could move on, turn the page. I tucked my phone away and walked into the night, my footsteps echoing through the quiet streets. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure. I would face it head on. I had come this far, and I wasn't going to stop now. What would you do when you've finally had enough and the life you've built begins to crumble beneath you? Rowan had spent years in a marriage she thought was built on trust and love, but after a humiliating night, marked by her husband's violent outburst and a shocking revelation about his debts, Rowan finds herself at a crossroads. Her life, already shaken by the betrayal of the man she loved, is now being threatened by dangerous people. After a confrontation with Blaine and his confession about his illegal dealings, Rowan is forced to take matters into her own hands. She confronts the loan shark behind Blaine's debts, Cyrus Kane, and starts gathering evidence to expose him. But Rowan isn't just running from danger, she's running towards a new life. She doesn't have all the answers, and she's not sure what the future holds, but she knows one thing. She's no longer going to be controlled. She takes action, refuses to be a victim, and ultimately begins the process of freeing herself from the mess Blaine has created. In this situation, Rowan's courage is the key to her survival. She took the risk of walking into a dangerous world, standing up for herself and demanding answers, refusing to let fear control her anymore. This moment of clarity changes everything for her, but could it truly be over? The message she receives at the end suggests the battle isn't finished yet. Will Rowan continue to fight, or is this just the beginning of a new chapter? What would you do if you were in Rowan's shoes? Would you confront the danger head-on or try to escape? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories.
I was knee-deep in spreadsheets, the soothing hum of the office around me, when my phone buzzed with a text that felt like a slap across the face. It was from Marjorie, my mother-in-law. "Family dinner tonight. Be there," it read, followed by a smiley face that felt more like a threat than an invitation. I could almost hear her voice, dripping with that passive-aggressive charm she wielded like a weapon. "My name is Alara. I'm a data analyst, which means I spend my days finding comfort in numbers and logic. They're predictable, unlike my personal life, which often feels like a chaotic mess. Nathan, my husband, is a good man, but he's stuck in a perpetual tug-of-war between me and his mother. And Marjorie? Well, she's a retired school principal who never really retired from being in charge." As I sat there, phone in hand, a mix of dread and determination bubbled up inside me. Family dinners with the Winslows were always a minefield. Marjorie had a knack for making me feel like an outsider, and Felicity, my sister-in-law, was her perfect accomplice. Felicity was everything Marjorie wanted in a daughter-in-law: successful, polished, and most importantly, compliant. I glanced at the time. There was no way I could escape this dinner, not without stirring up a storm. Nathan would likely shrug it off, telling me it was just Marjorie being Marjorie. But I knew better. There was always an agenda, a reason behind her gatherings, and I had a sinking feeling this one would be no different. When I got home, Nathan was already there, looking a bit like a deer caught in headlights. "Hey, Alara," he greeted, trying to sound casual. "Mom texted you, right?" "Yeah, she did," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "Any idea what this is about?" He shrugged, a gesture that was becoming all too familiar. You know how she is. She probably just wants to catch up. I nodded, but inside I was bracing myself. Marjorie never just wanted to catch up. She always had a point to make, usually at my expense. As we drove to the Winslow house, Nathan filled the silence with small talk about his day at work. I listened, nodding in the right places, but my mind was elsewhere. I was steeling myself for whatever Marjorie had planned. The Winslow home was a sprawling, old-world mansion, all polished wood and family portraits. Marjorie greeted us at the door, her smile as sharp as ever. "Alara, Nathan, so glad you could make it," she said, ushering us inside. Dinner started off innocently enough, with Marjorie and Felicity exchanging pleasantries about recent events. But I could feel the tension building, like the calm before a storm. And then, just as I was starting to relax, Marjorie struck. "So, Alara," she began, her voice sweet but her eyes calculating. "Have you and Nathan thought any more about starting a family? It's about time, don't you think?" There it was. Question that always hung between us like a guillotine. I felt Nathan stiffen beside me, but he said nothing. Typical. I took a breath, forcing a smile. "We're still discussing it, Marjorie. You know how busy things can get." Her smile widened, a cat with a cornered mouse. "Of course, dear. But you should really consider it. Family is everything, after all." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I barely tasted the food, too focused on keeping my composure. But inside, something shifted. I was tired of being the outsider, tired of Marjorie's subtle digs and Nathan's silence. As we left, Marjorie's words echoed in my mind, a challenge I couldn't ignore. I had spent too long letting her dictate my life, and it was time for a change. I didn't know exactly what I would do, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Marjorie win. The night air was cool as we drove home, and Nathan finally broke the silence. "Alara, I'm sorry about tonight. I should have said something." I glanced at him, seeing the struggle in his eyes. "It's okay, Nathan," I replied, though it wasn't. "Not really." But I had a plan forming, a way to finally stand up to Marjorie. And as we pulled into our driveway, I knew this was just the beginning. The morning after that tense dinner, I found myself staring at my reflection, toothbrush in hand, wondering how I'd let things get so complicated. I was still stewing over Marjorie's snide remarks, and Nathan's silence felt like a betrayal. But I had to focus on the day ahead, not the chaos of last night. At work, the numbers were my refuge. I lost myself in data sets and algorithms, each equation a step away from the Winslow drama. But during lunch, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a group message from Marjorie praising Felicity for winning some big case. "We're so proud of our lawyer and the family," the message read, with an abundance of exclamation points. I rolled my eyes, feeling the familiar sting of comparison. Felicity was always the golden child, and Marjorie never missed a chance to remind me. I put the phone down, trying to ignore the frustration bubbling up inside me, but it lingered like an unwelcome guest. When I got home, Nathan was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. I watched him for a moment, trying to muster up the courage to speak. "Nathan," I finally said, "can we talk about last night?" He paused, the knife hovering midair. "Sure, what's up?" I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Why didn't you say anything when Marjorie started in on me?" He sighed, setting the knife down. "Alara, you know how she is. It's easier just to let her talk. Easier for him, maybe. But not for me. I just wish you'd stand up for me sometimes," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "It feels like I'm always on my own." Nathan looked down, guilt flickering across his face. "I know. It's just, she's my mom, you know? It's complicated." Complicated. That word again. It was like a shield he used to deflect responsibility. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I didn't want to fight, not now. The next weekend, we were back at the Winslow house for another family gathering. Marjorie had insisted, of course. This time, it was to celebrate Felicity's latest legal triumph. As we sat in the living room, Marjorie was in full swing, regaling everyone with tales of Felicity's courtroom prowess. And there she was, standing up to that judge like she owned the place, Marjorie gushed, her eyes sparkling with pride. Felicity smiled modestly, though I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. Oh, it was nothing, really. Marjorie turned to me, her smile turning sharp. Alara, dear, how's work going? Anything exciting happening in data analysis? The way she said it, like my career was some quaint hobby, made my skin prickle. But I forced a smile. Actually, we're working on a big project. It's been keeping me busy. Well, as long as you're happy, Marjorie replied, her tone dismissive. I felt my resolve harden. I wasn't going to let her get to me, not this time. But before I could say anything more, Oliver, Nathan's brother, spoke up. Hey, Alara, have you heard about the new development project downtown? He asked, steering the conversation away from Marjorie's usual track. I nodded, grateful for the distraction. Yeah, I read about it. Sounds like a big deal. Oliver leaned in, lowering his voice. It's a mess, honestly. My firm's been involved, but things aren't going as planned. I glanced at him, surprised by his candor. Oliver was usually the peacemaker, the one who stayed out of the fray. But there was something in his eyes, a hint of frustration that mirrored my own. Really? What's going on? I asked, curious. He hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. Just some financial setbacks. We're trying to keep it under wraps for now. I nodded, filing the information away. It was a small revelation, but it felt significant. Marjorie's facade of the perfect family was starting to show cracks, and I couldn't help but wonder how deep they went. As the evening wore on, I watched the Winslow family dynamic play out, each member slipping into their roles like actors in a well-rehearsed play. Marjorie, the director, Felicity, the star, Nathan, the reluctant understudy. And me? I was the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit. But maybe that was about to change. I had a choice to make, whether to keep playing along or to stand up and rewrite my part in this family drama. And as I sat there, the chatter and laughter swirling around me, I knew one thing for sure. I was done being a spectator in my own life. The days after Oliver's quiet revelation passed in a blur of routine and restless thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something big, something that could change everything. The knowledge of Oliver's financial struggles was like a loaded gun, and I was holding it, unsure if I should pull the trigger. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Nathan came home looking unusually tense. He tossed his keys on the counter and sighed, running a hand through his hair. Hey, Alara, he said, his voice strained. Hey, I replied, watching him closely. Rough day. He nodded, leaning against the counter. Yeah, work's been crazy. And, well, Mom called. Course she did. I set down the knife I was using and turned to face him. What did she want? Nathan hesitated, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. She's planning another family dinner. This weekend. I felt my heart sink. Another dinner meant another round of Marjorie's games. Did she say why? He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. Just the usual. She wants everyone together. I nodded, trying to keep my frustration in check. All right. I guess we'll go. Nathan reached for my hand, his grip warm but uncertain. I know it's hard, Alara. But maybe this time will be different. I wanted to believe him, but deep down I knew better. Marjorie never did anything without a reason. The weekend came too quickly, and soon we were back at the Winslow mansion. As we entered, I noticed a tension in the air, a subtle shift in the usual dynamic. Marjorie was her usual self, but there was something else, an undercurrent of unease that I couldn't quite place. Dinner was served, and as we sat around the table, Marjorie began her usual routine of praise and critique. Felicity, dear, how's work? I heard you're up for another award. Felicity smiled, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. Yes, it's been a good year. Marjorie turned to me, her smile turning icy. And Alara, how's? Data. I forced a smile, refusing to rise to the bait. Busy, as always. Conversation moved on, but I could feel Marjorie watching me, waiting for a crack in my facade. And then, as if on cue, she dropped the bombshell. "Oliver," she said, her tone deceptively casual, "how's the new project coming along? I heard there were some issues." Oliver stiffened, his fork halfway to his mouth. "It's fine, Mom. Just a few setbacks." Marjorie's smile didn't waver. "Setbacks? I hope it's nothing serious." Oliver's eyes flicked to mine, a silent plea for support. I felt a surge of anger at Marjorie's manipulation, her need to control every aspect of our lives. But before I could speak, Felicity chimed in. "Well, I'm sure Oliver will handle it," she said smoothly, her gaze sliding over to me. "We all have our strengths, after all." The implication hung in the air, and I clenched my fists under the table. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating. I could stay silent, keep playing the part, or I could step up and change the script. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. "Actually, Marjorie," I said, my voice steady, "I've been thinking about how we can all support each other more. Maybe we could talk about how we can help Oliver with his project." The room went silent, all eyes on me. Marjorie's smile faltered just for a moment before she regained her composure. "That's very thoughtful, Alara," she replied, her voice tight. Oliver looked at me, gratitude and surprise mingling in his expression. "Thanks, Alara. That means a lot." I nodded, feeling a spark of satisfaction. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. For once, I'd taken control, refusing to let Marjorie dictate the narrative. As the evening wore on, I felt a shift in the family dynamic. Marjorie was quieter, her usual confidence shaken. And Nathan, though still caught in the middle, seemed to see me in a new light. When we left, I felt lighter, more determined than ever. Crisis wasn't over, but I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my place in this family. And as we drove home, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. The game had changed, and I was no longer a passive player. Planning Marjorie's anniversary party felt like preparing for battle. She had given me the task under the guise of a family obligation, but I knew better. It was a test, a chance for her to see me fail in front of everyone. But I was determined to turn the tables. I spent weeks coordinating every detail, from the venue to the menu, ensuring everything was perfect. I wanted this event to reflect not only Marjorie's taste, but also her need for control. My goal was to subtly highlight her overbearing nature without her realizing it until it was too late. On the day of the party, the venue was abuzz with activity. I moved through the crowd, checking on final preparations. Nathan was by my side, offering support in his quiet way. "You've done an amazing job," he said, squeezing my hand. "Thanks," I replied, scanning the room. "I just hope it goes smoothly." As guests began to arrive, I watched Marjorie work the room, her smile as practiced as ever. Felicity was there too, playing her part as the doting daughter-in-law. Oliver was more reserved, but he gave me a nod of encouragement. The evening unfolded with a polished elegance that even Marjorie couldn't fault. But as dinner was served, I noticed her eyes narrowing, taking in the subtle details I had woven into the decor, small nods to her controlling nature, like place cards with quotes about leadership and control. Just as the main course was being cleared, Marjorie stood to make a toast. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "And thank you, Alara, for organizing such a lovely event." I felt a flicker of surprise. Was that genuine praise? "But," Marjorie continued, her tone shifting, "I do have to wonder if perhaps some of the choices were a bit ambitious." There it was. The veiled criticism. I kept my smile in place, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me falter. As the night wore on, I mingled with guests, receiving compliments on the event. But beneath the surface, I was tense, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And drop it did, in the form of Felicity. "Alara, can we talk?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk. I nodded, following her to a quieter corner of the room. What's up? Felicity leaned in, her expression sympathetic. I just wanted to say you've done a great job tonight. But you know how Mom is. She likes things a certain way. I nodded, sensing there was more. I know. I just wanted to do something special. She smiled, but there was a sharpness to it. And you did. But maybe next time you should run things by her first. Just a thought. I forced a laugh, though inside I was seething. Thanks for the advice, Felicity. As she walked away, I felt the weight of her words. It was a reminder that no matter how hard I tried, Marjorie and Felicity would always find a way to undermine me. But then, something unexpected happened. Oliver approached me, his expression serious. Alara, can we talk? Of course, I replied, curious. He led me outside, away from the noise. I just wanted to say thank you for standing up for me at the last dinner. It meant a lot. I nodded, touched by his sincerity. You're welcome, Oliver. We're family, right? He smiled, a real one this time. Yeah, we are. And I want you to know if you ever need anything, I'm here. His words were a balm to my frayed nerves, a reminder that not everyone in the Winslow family was against me. As the party wound down, I felt a mix of relief and resolve. Marjorie's subtle jabs had stung, but they hadn't broken me. And with Oliver's support, I felt more empowered than ever. But I knew this was just the beginning. Marjorie wouldn't back down easily, and Felicity would continue to play her games. I needed to be ready for whatever came next to protect myself and those I cared about. As Nathan and I drove home, I glanced at him, feeling a renewed sense of determination. Nathan, I think it's time we start making some changes, I said, my voice steady. He looked at me, a hint of understanding in his eyes. What do you have in mind? I smiled, feeling the weight of the evening lift. I'm not sure yet, but I know we can't keep living like this. And with that, I knew I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the knowledge that I wasn't alone in this fight. The aftermath of the anniversary party lingered like a storm cloud, casting long shadows over my thoughts. Marjorie's veiled criticisms were still fresh in my mind, but they were nothing compared to the gnawing feeling that I was on the brink of something bigger, something that could change everything. A few days later, I was at home trying to unwind with a book when Nathan walked in, his face a mix of apprehension and determination. Alara, we need to talk. I set the book down, bracing myself. What's going on? He sat beside me, his gaze steady. Mom called again. She wants us to come over this weekend. Apparently, there's something important she needs to discuss. I felt a familiar tension coil in my stomach. Did she say what it was about? Nathan shook his head. No, but she sounded different. I think it's serious. Different. Serious. Words that usually meant trouble where Marjorie was concerned. I nodded, trying to keep my voice even. Okay, we'll go. The weekend arrived too quickly, and as we pulled up to the Winslow house, I felt a sense of foreboding. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, a stark contrast to the usual social gatherings. Marjorie was waiting for us in the living room, her expression unreadable. Felicity and Oliver were already there, both looking uncharacteristically subdued. Thank you all for coming, Marjorie began, her voice lacking its usual edge. There's something we need to discuss as a family. I exchanged a glance with Nathan, who looked just as puzzled as I felt. Marjorie took a deep breath, her composure slipping for a moment. It's about the family finances. There have been complications. Felicity's eyes widened, a rare crack in her polished facade. Complications? What do you mean? Marjorie hesitated, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. Oliver's firm is struggling more than we realized, and it's affecting the family's investments. I watched Oliver, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I remembered our conversation, the weight of his secret now laid bare for all to see. Nathan shifted beside me, his voice tense. Why didn't you tell us sooner, Mom? Marjorie's gaze flicked to him, her control slipping further. I thought I could handle it. I didn't want to worry you all. The room was silent, the gravity of the situation sinking in. I felt a strange mix of emotions: sympathy for Oliver, frustration with Marjorie, and a growing determination to find a way through this. As the conversation continued, I realized this was an opportunity, a chance to change the dynamics that had defined our family for so long. But it was also a test, one that would push me to my limits. Later, as we drove home, Nathan was uncharacteristically quiet. I could sense the turmoil beneath his calm exterior, the struggle to reconcile his loyalty to his family with the reality of the situation. "Elara," he said finally, breaking the silence. "What are we going to do?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision ahead. "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out." The next few days passed in a blur of discussions and decisions. I found myself stepping into a role I hadn't anticipated, offering support and solutions where I could. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. Then, one evening, as I was going through some documents, I stumbled upon something unexpected: a discrepancy in the family's financial records. It was subtle but significant, a potential solution hidden in plain sight. Called Oliver, my heart racing. "Oliver, I think I found something that could help." His relief was palpable. "Really? What is it?" I explained the situation, outlining a plan that could potentially stabilize the firm and the family's finances. It was risky, but it was a chance to make things right. As we talked, I realized how far I'd come, how much I'd changed since that first dinner when Marjorie had made me feel so small. I was no longer the outsider, the one who didn't belong. I was part of this family for better or worse, and I was determined to make a difference. But as the call ended, I knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and potential pitfalls. And as I sat there, the weight of the decision pressing down on me, I couldn't help but wonder if I was truly ready for what lay ahead. Plan for Marjorie's surprise birthday dinner had been my olive branch, a chance to mend fences and finally show her that I was capable of more than she gave me credit for. I had spent weeks organizing every detail, hoping to bridge the chasm between us. But as I arrived at the exclusive restaurant, my heart sank. The maitre d' looked at me with polite confusion. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no reservation under that name." I felt my stomach drop. "Are you sure? It was supposed to be for Marjorie Winslow." He checked again, shaking his head. "I'm afraid not. Perhaps there's been a mistake. A mistake. Or a calculated move." Panic and disbelief warred within me as I stepped aside, trying to make sense of what was happening. I called Nathan, my hands shaking as I waited for him to pick up. "Hey, Elara," he answered, his voice casual, unaware of the turmoil I was in. "Nathan, I'm at the restaurant and there's no reservation." "Did something change?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "Oh, I thought Mom mentioned something about changing plans. Didn't she tell you?" The words hit me like a punch. "No, she didn't," I replied, my voice tight with anger and humiliation. "I'm sorry, Elara." "I thought you knew," Nathan said, sounding genuinely regretful. I ended the call, feeling a mix of betrayal and despair. This was Marjorie's doing, of course. She had orchestrated this to make me look foolish, to remind me of my place. And Nathan, caught in the middle as always, had let it happen. As I stood outside the restaurant, the city lights blurring through unshed tears, I realized how isolated I felt. The Winslow family had closed ranks, and I was left on the outside once again. I wandered aimlessly, my mind racing. Everything I had worked for, all my attempts to prove myself, felt meaningless. I thought of Oliver, of the secrets I had kept, and wondered if I had been wrong to try and help. Maybe Marjorie was right, maybe I didn't belong. Just as I was about to give in to despair, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Oliver. "Elara, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. Let's meet up. I want to help." A lifeline. I clung to his words, feeling a flicker of hope. I replied, agreeing to meet him at a nearby cafe. When I arrived, Oliver was already there, his expression one of genuine concern. Alara, I can't believe she did this. It's not right. I sat down, grateful for his support. Thank you, Oliver. I don't know what to do anymore. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. You've done so much for this family. It's time they see that. We talked for hours, and slowly a plan began to form. It wasn't revenge, not exactly, but a way to show Marjorie that I wouldn't be pushed aside so easily. Oliver offered his help, and for the first time in a long while I felt like I wasn't alone. As we parted ways, the weight of the evening still lingered, but it was tempered by a newfound resolve. I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. Back at home, Nathan was waiting for me, his expression a mix of guilt and relief. Alara, I'm sorry. I should have told you. I looked at him, feeling the distance between us. Nathan, I need to know that you're with me in this. I can't keep fighting alone. He nodded, his eyes earnest. I am. I promise. It was a start, a fragile truce in the midst of chaos. As I lay in bed that night, I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to face it. Marjorie had pushed me to my lowest point, but she had also reignited a fire within me. I was done playing by her rules. It was time to write my own story, to find my own way forward. And with Oliver and Nathan by my side, I knew I could. The fallout from Marjorie's birthday debacle lingered like a storm cloud, casting a shadow over everything I did. But it was the video that changed everything. Someone at the restaurant had captured Marjorie's dismissive remarks about me on camera, and it had spread like wildfire online. Community that once revered her was now abuzz with whispers of her true nature. I found myself at the center of a whirlwind, my phone buzzing with messages from friends and colleagues who had seen the clip. But amidst the chaos, I received an unexpected call from the restaurant's owner, a man named Daniel. Alara, I saw the video, Daniel said, his voice steady. I'd like to offer you a chance to share your side of the story. We're hosting a community event next week, and I think people would be interested in hearing from you. A platform. A chance to finally speak my truth. I hesitated, the weight of the decision heavy on my shoulders. But I knew this was an opportunity one couldn't pass up. The day of the event arrived, and as I stood backstage, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. Nathan was there, offering quiet support, and Oliver had come too, a steady presence by my side. You've got this, Alara, Oliver said, his confidence in me unwavering. I nodded, taking a deep breath as I stepped onto the stage. The room was packed, the air buzzing with anticipation. I scanned the crowd, my eyes landing on Marjorie, seated near the front with Felicity beside her. Her expression was unreadable, but I could sense the tension radiating from her. Thank you all for being here, I began, my voice steady despite the nerves. I know many of you have seen the video, and I wanted to take this opportunity to address what happened. I spoke from the heart, sharing my experiences with the Winslow family, the challenges and triumphs, the moments of doubt and determination. I didn't shy away from the truth, but I also didn't seek to vilify Marjorie. Instead, I focused on my journey, the lessons I had learned, and the strength I had found in standing up for myself. As I spoke, I could feel the room shift, the energy changing. People were listening, really listening, and I felt a sense of validation that had long eluded me. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, a wave of support that washed over me. I glanced at Marjorie, who sat still, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. This was it, the moment I had been building toward, and I felt a sense of peace settle over me. But just as I was about to leave the stage, Marjorie stood up, her eyes locked on mine. Alara, she called, her voice carrying across the room. May I say something? The room fell silent, all eyes on us. I nodded, unsure of what to expect. Marjorie stepped forward, her expression softening in a way I hadn't seen before. I've spent a long time trying to maintain control, trying to protect what I thought was important, she began, her voice tinged with regret. But in doing so, I lost sight of what truly matters: family, understanding, and respect. Her words hung in the air, a quiet admission of her own struggles. I felt a flicker of hope, a possibility of change. "I'm sorry, Alara," Marjorie continued, her gaze unwavering. "I've been unfair to you, and I realize now that I need to change." The unexpected resolution caught me off guard, a twist I hadn't anticipated. I nodded, acknowledging her words, the beginning of a new chapter for us both. As the event concluded, I felt a sense of closure, a resolution that tied back to the themes of justice and understanding. I had faced my greatest challenge, and in doing so, I had found a path forward, one that was my own. Nathan joined me, his expression one of pride and relief. "You were amazing," he said, wrapping an arm around me. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you and Oliver." As we left the venue, I knew the road ahead would still have its challenges, but I was ready to face them. I had found my voice, my strength, and my place in the world. And with that, I knew I could handle whatever came next. The weeks following the community event felt like a new chapter, not just for me, but for the entire Winslow family. Marjorie's public apology and the viral video had shifted the family dynamics in ways I hadn't anticipated. The scrutiny had forced her to confront her behaviors, and for the first time there was an air of genuine change. One afternoon, as I was packing up at work, my phone buzzed with a call from Marjorie. There was a time when such a call would have filled me with dread, but now curiosity took its place. "Elara," Marjorie began, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I was hoping we could meet for coffee. Just the two of us." "Sure," I replied, surprised by the invitation. "When?" "Tomorrow if you're free," she suggested, and I agreed, sensing the importance of this meeting. The next day, I arrived at a quaint cafe, finding Marjorie already seated, a cup of tea in front of her. She looked up as I approached, a tentative smile on her lips. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing for me to sit. We exchanged pleasantries, the conversation light until Marjorie took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Alara. About everything." I nodded, letting her continue. "I realize now how much I've hurt you, how my need for control pushed you away," she admitted, her eyes earnest. "I'm truly sorry." Her apology was unexpected, but it felt sincere. "Thank you, Marjorie." "That means a lot," I replied, feeling a weight lift. We talked for a while, discussing not just the past, but the future. It was a conversation I never thought we'd have, and it felt like a turning point, a chance to rebuild our relationship on new terms. Afterward, I met Nathan for dinner, feeling lighter than I had in years. He listened as I recounted my meeting with Marjorie, his expression one of relief and hope. "That's amazing, Alara," he said, reaching for my hand. "I'm so proud of you." I smiled, grateful for his support. "I couldn't have done it without you and Oliver." Speaking of Oliver, he had found a way to stabilize his firm with the help of the financial insights I'd discovered. The family was slowly coming together, healing from the fractures that had once seemed insurmountable. As we finished dinner, Nathan looked at me, a question in his eyes. "So, what's next for you?" Paused, considering his question. "I've been offered a role as a data consultant for a major tech company," I revealed, excitement bubbling beneath the surface. "It's a big step, but I think I'm ready." Nathan grinned, his pride evident. "That's incredible, Alara. You deserve it." The opportunity felt like the culmination of my journey, a chance to embrace my independence and forge my own path. But it wasn't just about the job, it was about everything I had learned along the way. As we left the restaurant, I felt a sense of closure, but also a lingering question. Marjorie's transformation was promising, but could it last? And what did it mean for the family moving forward? That night, as I settled into bed, I found a letter tucked into my bag, the handwriting unmistakably Marjorie's. I hesitated, then opened it, curious about its contents. In the letter, Marjorie expressed her vulnerability, sharing regrets and hopes for the future. It was a side of her I hadn't seen before, and it left me with a sense of understanding and compassion. The letter was a reminder that people could change, that forgiveness and growth were possible. It was a subtle twist, a lingering question about the nature of redemption and the complexities of family dynamics. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace. My journey had been one of challenges and revelations, of finding my voice and standing my ground. And while some questions remained, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the lessons I had learned and the strength I had found within myself.
I never thought the day would unravel like it did. It started like any other. Me, Quinn, rushing through my morning routine, barely managing to gulp down a cup of coffee before heading to the clinic. But when I got home that evening, everything changed. The first thing I noticed was the eerie quiet. Usually, the house was a cacophony of Theo's laughter or the TV blaring some cartoon. But today, silence echoed off the walls. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe Theo was out with Lorraine and Hank. I headed to my room, eager to shed the day's stress. That's when I saw it. Or rather, didn't see it. My father's watch, the one thing I had left of him, was gone from its usual spot on the dresser. Panic surged through me like a cold wave. I rifled through the drawers, checked under the bed, even scoured the bathroom, but it was nowhere to be found. I stormed out of my room, my heart pounding. "Sage!" I called, my voice cutting through the silence. "Have you seen my watch?" Sage appeared at the top of the stairs, her expression a perfect mask of innocence. "What watch?" "The one Dad left me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It was on my dresser this morning, and now it's gone." She leaned against the banister, a sly smile playing at her lips. "Maybe you misplaced it. You know how scatterbrained you can be." I clenched my fists, a simmering frustration bubbling beneath my skin. Sage always had a knack for making me doubt myself, but not this time. "I know I left it there," I insisted. She shrugged, turning away as if the conversation bored her. "Well, I haven't seen it." Her dismissive tone only fueled my anger. I wanted to scream, to demand she take me seriously, but I knew it would be pointless. Sage had a way of twisting things, making it seem like I was the one in the wrong. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside. "If you find it, let me know," I said, my voice strained. "Sure, Quinn," she replied, already halfway down the stairs. "I'll keep an eye out." I watched her go, a sinking feeling settling in my stomach. Sage and I had never gotten along, but this felt different. It felt personal. My father's watch was more than just a timepiece. It was a link to a past that had been ripped away from me when he died. Losing it felt like losing him all over again. I sank onto the edge of my bed, staring at the empty spot on the dresser. The watch had been a constant in my life, a reminder of the man who had taught me to be strong, to stand up for myself. And now it was gone, just like him. As the evening wore on, I tried to shake off the feeling of loss, but it clung to me like a shadow. I busied myself with chores, hoping to distract my mind, but every little thing reminded me of what was missing. The clink of dishes, the ticking of the clock, even the soft rustle of leaves outside the window. Later, when Lorraine came home, I brought it up, hoping for some maternal comfort. "Mom, have you seen Dad's watch?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She paused, a crease forming between her brows. "No, honey. Did you lose it?" "I think someone took it," I said, glancing towards the living room where Sage was lounging on the couch. Lorraine sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I'll talk to everyone, see if it turns up." Her words were meant to reassure, but they only deepened my frustration. I knew she'd do her best, but Lorraine had always been more of a peacekeeper than a problem solver. And in our house, peace often meant turning a blind eye. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The watch was gone, but it felt like something much bigger was at stake. I didn't know what Sage was up to, but I was determined to find out. I had to. For my father, for myself. A soft knock on my door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Theo, his small face peeking through the gap. "Quinn, are you okay?" I managed a smile, ruffling his hair. "Yeah, buddy. Just thinking." He nodded, satisfied with my answer, and slipped back to his room. I watched him go, my resolve hardening. I might feel like an outsider in my own family, but I wasn't powerless. Not by a long shot. Tomorrow, I'd start digging. I'd find out what Sage was up to, and I'd get my father's watch back. One way or another. The morning after the watch went missing, I woke up to the sound of muffled voices drifting from the kitchen. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and headed downstairs, curious about the conversation. Lorraine and Hank were huddled over the kitchen table, their faces etched with concern. I just don't know how we're going to manage, Lorraine was saying, her voice a mix of worry and exhaustion. Hank sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. We'll figure it out, Lorraine. We always do. I lingered in the doorway, unsure if I should interrupt. Lorraine noticed me first, her eyes softening as she gestured for me to join them. Quinn, we were just talking about some changes coming up. The way she said changes made my stomach twist with apprehension. What changes? Lorraine exchanged a glance with Hank before turning back to me. I'm pregnant. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications. I blinked, trying to process the news. Pregnant? Wow, that's unexpected. Hank chuckled, though it sounded more like a cough. Yeah, tell me about it. I forced a smile, though inside I felt a mix of emotions swirling. Congratulations, I guess. That's exciting news. Lorraine reached across the table, squeezing my hand. It's a blessing, really. But it means things are going to be a bit different around here. Different. The word echoed in my mind, and I knew exactly what it meant. More attention on the new baby, more time spent on family matters that didn't include me. I nodded, trying to appear supportive. Of course. Whatever you need, I'm here to help. But as I left the kitchen, a knot of frustration tightened in my chest. I could already feel myself slipping further into the background. My father's watch a stark reminder of how easily things could be taken from me. Later that day, I found myself at the park, seeking solace in the familiar routine of walking the trails. The crisp air helped clear my head, though my thoughts kept circling back to the announcement and what it meant for my place in the family. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't notice Nolan jogging towards me, his camera slung over one shoulder. He waved, a wide grin on his face as he approached. Hey, Quinn. Fancy running into you here. I managed a genuine smile, grateful for the distraction. Hey, Nolan. Out capturing the beauty of nature? He nodded, falling into step beside me. Always. But enough about me. How are you doing? I hesitated, unsure how much to share. But there was something about Nolan's easygoing presence that made me want to open up. It's been a weird day. My mom just told me she's pregnant. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. Wow, that's big news. How do you feel about it? I shrugged, kicking at a loose pebble on the path. I don't know. Happy for her, I guess. But it's complicated. I've always felt like an outsider, and now. Nolan nodded, understanding in his eyes. I get it. Family dynamics can be tricky. But you're strong, Quinn. You'll figure it out. His words warmed me, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, the rustling leaves and distant chatter of park-goers filling the space between us. As we circled back to the entrance, Nolan paused, a thoughtful look on his face. You know, if you ever need a break from all that, you're welcome to join me on a shoot. It might be good to get away for a bit. I considered his offer, tempted by the idea of escaping, even if just for a day. I might take you up on that. Thanks, Nolan. We parted ways with a promise to meet up soon, and I headed home, feeling a little lighter. But as I walked through the door, the reality of the situation settled back over me like a heavy blanket. Sage was in the living room, her eyes glued to her laptop. She looked up as I entered, a smirk playing on her lips. Heard the big news. Guess you'll be playing second fiddle to a baby now. I ignored the jab, heading for the stairs. Her words stung, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Hey, Quinn, she called after me, her voice dripping with faux concern. You might want to check your room again. Things have a way of disappearing around here. I froze, her insinuation clear. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze with a steely resolve. If you know something about my watch, Sage, just say it. She shrugged, her expression unreadable. Just saying, maybe you should keep a closer eye on your stuff. I clenched my jaw, refusing to rise to her bait. Instead, I headed upstairs, determined to find out what game she was playing. She might think she had the upper hand, but I wasn't backing down. Not this time. The next few days felt like walking on a tightrope, each step more precarious than the last. The house buzzed with a tense energy, everyone tiptoeing around each other, like we were all waiting for something to explode. I was in the kitchen, mindlessly chopping vegetables, when I heard the raised voices from the living room. Lorraine and Hank were at it again, their words sharp and cutting. I couldn't help but listen, the tension drawing me in like a magnet. You can't keep hiding this, Hank, Lorraine said, her voice strained with frustration. We need to talk about it. Hank's response was muffled but unmistakably defensive. I'm handling it, Lorraine. Just trust me. I leaned against the counter, the knife forgotten in my hand. It wasn't the first time I'd overheard them arguing about money, but this felt different. There was a desperation in Lorraine's voice that made my skin prickle. Before I could make sense of it, Sage sauntered into the kitchen, her eyes gleaming with a knowing look. "Sounds like things are heating up," she said, her tone casual but her gaze sharp. I ignored her, focusing on the task at hand. "Not my business," I muttered, though my curiosity was piqued. "Maybe not," Sage replied, leaning against the counter with a smug grin. "But it could be useful information, you know? If you play your cards right." I set the knife down, turning to face her. "What are you getting at, Sage?" She shrugged, her expression infuriatingly coy. "Just saying, sometimes it pays to know what's going on behind closed doors." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I felt a chill run down my spine, the realization that Sage was playing a game I didn't understand. But before I could press her further, the argument in the living room reached a crescendo. "I can't believe you'd risk everything like this." Lorraine's voice cracked, a mix of anger and betrayal. "I'm doing what I have to do," Hank shot back, his voice a low rumble. I moved to the doorway, peering into the living room. Lorraine stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of worry. Hank was pacing, his movements agitated and restless. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping into the room. The tension was palpable, a living thing that filled the space between us. Lorraine sighed, her shoulders sagging. "It's nothing, Quinn. Just adult stuff." I knew better than to accept that at face value. "It doesn't sound like nothing." Hank stopped pacing, his gaze meeting mine with a mixture of frustration and something else. "Fear, maybe?" "We're just having a discussion," he said, his voice gruff but lacking its usual authority. I nodded, though I wasn't convinced. There was more to this than they were letting on, and I had a feeling it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. As the evening wore on, I found myself restless, unable to shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. I retreated to my room, hoping for some peace, but my mind kept circling back to the argument and Sage's cryptic words. I was just settling into bed when my phone buzzed with a message from Nolan. "Hey, you okay? Want to talk?" I hesitated, then typed a quick reply. "Yeah, just a lot going on. Can we meet up tomorrow?" His response was immediate. "Of course. Let's grab coffee." The thought of seeing Nolan lifted my spirits, if only a little. But as I lay in the dark, the weight of everything pressed down on me. The missing watch, the baby, the financial troubles. Each piece felt like part of a larger puzzle I couldn't quite see. The next morning, I met Nolan at our usual spot, a cozy cafe tucked away from the hustle of the city. He greeted me with a warm smile and a steaming cup of coffee. "Hey, you look like you could use this." I took the cup gratefully, savoring the warmth. "You have no idea." He leaned forward, concern etched in his features. "Want to tell me what's going on?" I hesitated, unsure where to begin. But as I recounted the events of the past few days, Nolan listened patiently, his presence a comforting anchor in the storm. When I finished, he leaned back, thoughtful. "Sounds like there's a lot at play here. But you're strong, Quinn. You'll get through this." I nodded, though his words felt like a balm on a wound that refused to heal. "I just feel like everything's falling apart." He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Then maybe it's time to start building something new." His words lingered in my mind as we parted ways, a seed of an idea taking root. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to take control of my own destiny, to stop letting the chaos dictate my life. As I headed home, I resolved to find out what Sage was up to and what secrets my family was hiding. It was time to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The decision had been weighing on me like a stone. I stood in the middle of my room, the faint glow of my laptop screen casting a pale light across the walls. The email offering a job in a neighboring city was open, the cursor blinking impatiently at the end of the message. It felt like a lifeline thrown into the stormy sea of my life, but grabbing it meant leaving everything behind. I heard a soft knock at the door, and Theo's small voice called out, "Quinn, can I come in?" "Sure, buddy," I replied, closing the laptop as he shuffled in, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. He climbed onto my bed, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Why do you look so sad?" I forced a smile, ruffling his hair. "I'm not sad, just thinking about some grown-up stuff." Theo nodded, his innocent face free of the complications that tangled my mind. "Are you going away?" His question hit me like a punch to the gut. "Why do you ask that?" "I heard Mom and Hank talking. They said you might leave," he said, his voice small and uncertain. I sighed, pulling him into a hug. "I'm just thinking about it, Theo. But no matter what, I'll always be here for you." He seemed satisfied with that answer, snuggling closer. I held him, my heart aching at the thought of leaving him behind. But I knew I had to consider what was best for me, even if it meant making difficult choices. The next morning, I woke early, determined to clear my head with a walk. As I passed the living room, I overheard Lorraine and Hank talking in hushed tones, their words carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. "We can't keep this from her, Lorraine," Hank said, his voice tinged with urgency. "I know, but how do we even begin to explain?" Lorraine replied, her tone laced with anxiety. I paused, my curiosity piqued. I wasn't one to eavesdrop, but something told me this was important. I lingered just out of sight, straining to hear more. "The debts are piling up, and if she finds out about the mortgage," Hank's voice trailed off, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I felt my stomach drop, the pieces starting to fall into place. The financial troubles, the tension between them, it was all connected. But why had they kept it a secret from me? I stepped into the room, my presence startling them both. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Lorraine looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and resignation. "Quinn, we need to talk." As they explained the situation, the mounting debts, the strain on the family, I felt a mix of anger and betrayal. They'd kept me in the dark while everything crumbled around us. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "We didn't want to worry you," Lorraine said, reaching for my hand. "We thought we could handle it." I pulled away, the hurt too raw. "I'm part of this family too. I deserve to know what's going on." Hank sighed, his facade of authority slipping. "We're sorry, Quinn. We should have been honest." I nodded, though the apology felt hollow. The revelation shifted something inside me, a realization that I couldn't keep living in this environment of secrets and half-truths. I needed to take control of my own life. Later, as I sat in my room, the weight of my decision pressing down on me, Sage knocked and entered without waiting for an invitation. "Heard the big news," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I shot her a look, my patience wearing thin. "What do you want, Sage?" She shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "Just checking in. You know, family and all." I studied her, trying to read the subtext beneath her casual demeanor. "Cut the act, Sage. What's your angle?" She smirked, a glint of something unreadable in her eyes. "No angle, Quinn. Just wondering what you'll do now that you know the truth." Her words hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in a question. I realized then that she thrived on the chaos, using it to manipulate and control. But I wouldn't let her get to me. Not anymore. I took a deep breath, meeting her gaze with newfound determination. "I'm going to do what's best for me. And that might mean leaving." Her expression faltered for a moment, surprise flickering across her features. But she quickly recovered, her smirk returning. "Well, good luck with that." As she left, I felt a sense of clarity washing over me. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to choose. I opened my laptop, rereading the job offer. It was time to take a leap of faith, to start building a life free from the shadows of my past. I clicked reply, my fingers steady as I typed my acceptance. It was the first step toward freedom, and I was ready to take it. The move to the new city was a whirlwind. I found myself in a small, cozy apartment, the walls bare and the air filled with the scent of fresh paint. It was a blank slate, a chance to start anew, but the echoes of my past clung to me like shadows. Work at the veterinary clinic was a welcome distraction. The routine of caring for animals, each with their own quirks and needs, grounded me. Yet, even amidst the bustle, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Nolan was a constant presence, his support unwavering. We spent evenings exploring the city, finding hidden gems and sharing laughter that felt almost foreign after the tension of home. But beneath the surface, I sensed a distance growing between us, fueled by my unresolved fears and the secrets I carried. One evening, as we sat in a dimly lit cafe, Nolan leaned forward, his expression serious. "Quinn, I've been meaning to ask. How are you really doing?" I hesitated, stirring my coffee as I searched for the right words. "I'm okay, I guess. It's just a lot to process." He nodded, his gaze steady. "I get that. But if you ever need to talk, I'm here." I smiled, grateful for his patience. "I know. It's just, I left a lot behind, and it's hard to let go." Nolan reached for my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You'll get there. Just take it one step at a time." His words were comforting, but as we walked back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The next day, I received a call from Lorraine. Her voice was strained, the usual warmth replaced by an edge of urgency. "Quinn, we need to talk. It's about Sage." My heart skipped a beat, dread coiling in my stomach. "What about her?" She's in town. She said she needed to see you. I felt a chill run down my spine. Sage showing up unannounced was never a good sign. Did she say why? She claimed she wanted to make amends, but I'm not sure what to believe. A knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. Sage's motives were always shrouded in mystery, her actions unpredictable. I'll talk to her, I said, though the prospect filled me with unease. Later that evening, Sage arrived at my apartment, her expression a mix of contrition and defiance. Nice place, she said, glancing around as she stepped inside. Thanks, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Why are you here, Sage? She sighed, dropping onto the couch. I messed up, Quinn. I know that. But I want to make things right. I crossed my arms, skepticism etched into my features. And how do you plan to do that? She hesitated, her bravado faltering. I don't know yet. But I want to start by being honest. I studied her, searching for any hint of manipulation. Honest about what? She met my gaze, her eyes unusually vulnerable. About the watch. I took it. The admission hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was a different beast. Why? I was angry, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. You were always Dad's favorite, even after he died. I wanted to hurt you. Her words cut deep, reopening old wounds. But beneath the hurt, I saw the fear that drove her actions. And now I'm trying to be better. I'm seeing a therapist, working through my issues. I want to give it back. I nodded, a mix of relief and resentment swirling inside me. I appreciate your honesty, Sage. But it's going to take more than that to fix things. She nodded, her expression earnest. I know, but I'm willing to try if you'll let me. As she left, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The revelation had shifted something inside me, challenging my perception of revenge and justice. Sage's admission was a step towards healing, but it also forced me to confront my own motives and the grudges I held. I spent the night tossing and turning, my mind racing with possibilities. Sage's confession had opened a door, one that led to a path of forgiveness and understanding. But walking it meant letting go of the anger that had fueled me for so long. The next morning, as I stood at the window watching the city come to life, I realized that the choice was mine. I could hold on to the past, or I could embrace the future with an open heart. It was a daunting decision, but one I knew I had to make. For myself, and for the life I wanted to build. Sage had been staying with me for a week, and the tension in the apartment was palpable. I wanted to believe she was trying to change, but old habits die hard. There was a constant undercurrent of suspicion, a feeling that at any moment, the fragile piece could shatter. Nolan had been patient, but I could sense his frustration growing. We'd planned a quiet dinner at home, hoping for a semblance of normalcy, but Sage's presence was a constant reminder of the chaos I'd left behind. As we sat at the small dining table, the conversation was stilted, each of us picking at our food. Nolan finally broke the silence, his voice careful but firm. So, Sage, what's your plan now that you're here? Sage looked up, her fork paused midair. I'm not sure yet. I'm thinking of finding some freelance work, maybe staying in the city for a while. Nolan nodded, though I could see the tension in his jaw. And how long is a while? She shrugged, her nonchalance grating on my nerves. Not sure. Depends on how things go. I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. Sage's indefinite stay was a strain on my relationship with Nolan, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was biding her time for something. After dinner, Nolan and I sat on the couch, the air between us thick with unspoken words. Quinn, we need to talk about this, he said, his voice gentle but insistent. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I know. It's just complicated. He turned to face me, concern etched into his features. I get that you want to help her, but at what cost? This is affecting us. I nodded, guilt gnawing at me. I just thought, maybe she really was trying to change. Nolan reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. I want to believe that too, but you need to set boundaries. For both our sakes. His words struck a chord, and I knew he was right. I'd been so focused on giving Sage a chance that I'd neglected my own needs and the relationship I was trying to build with Nolan. The next day, I resolved to talk to Sage to set some ground rules. But before I could, I received a call from Lorraine, her voice trembling with urgency. Quinn, something's happened. My heart skipped a beat, dread pooling in my stomach. What is it? It's Hank. He's been in an accident at work. He's in the hospital. The news hit me like a freight train, the world tilting on its axis. I mumbled a quick goodbye to Lorraine, promising to be there as soon as I could. I turned to Nolan, my voice shaky. I need to go back. Hank's in the hospital. He nodded, his expression softening. I'll drive you. The trip back was a blur, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When we arrived at the hospital, Lorraine was waiting, her face drawn and pale. He's stable, but it's serious, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As we sat in the waiting room, the weight of everything pressed down on me. Hank's accident had thrown everything into sharper focus, reminding me of the fragility of life and the importance of family, no matter how fractured. Sage showed up shortly after, her face a mask of worry. She sat beside me, her usual bravado stripped away. I'm sorry, Quinn. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I nodded, the anger and resentment I'd been holding on to dissipating in the face of our shared concern. We'll figure it out. Together. As the hours dragged on, I realized that my ideas of revenge and justice had been misguided. Holding on to past grievances had only served to isolate me further. It was time to let go, to focus on healing and rebuilding. But just as I thought things couldn't get more complicated, Lorraine approached, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and something else. Fear? Quinn, there's something you need to know. I braced myself, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. What is it? She hesitated, her gaze flicking to Sage before settling back on me. Hank. He's been hiding something. The debts, they're worse than we thought. He was trying to fix it, but... Her words trailed off, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. The revelation was a punch to the gut, a reminder of the tangled web of secrets that had ensnared us all. As I sat there, the weight of the situation pressing down on me, I realized that I was at a crossroads. I could let this break me, or I could find a way to rise above it, to forge a path forward that embraced forgiveness and understanding. It was a daunting task, but one I knew I had to face. For my family, for Nolan, and most importantly for myself. The hospital corridors were a blur of sterile white and muted voices as I paced, my mind racing with the weight of Lorraine's revelation. Hank's financial troubles were far deeper than I'd imagined, and now, with him in the hospital, the responsibility fell on us to pick up the pieces. Sage was sitting in the waiting room, her usual bravado replaced by a quiet uncertainty. She looked up as I approached, her eyes searching mine for some sign of reassurance. Quinn, Save it, Sage, I said, cutting her off. We need to focus on what's important right now. She nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. I know. I'm sorry for everything. I took a deep breath, the tension between us palpable. We'll deal with that later. Right now, we need to figure out how to help Hank. Lorraine joined us, her face drawn with worry. The doctor said he'll need surgery, but with our financial situation. Her voice trailed off, the unspoken implications hanging in the air. I felt a surge of determination, a resolve to do whatever it took to keep our family afloat. Just as I was about to speak, my phone buzzed with a message from Nolan. I'm outside. Do you need anything? I texted back quickly, grateful for his support. Just you. Can you come in? Moments later, Nolan walked in, his presence a calming balm amidst the chaos. He wrapped me in a hug, his strength bolstering my resolve. What's the plan? He asked, his voice steady. We need to find a way to cover the costs, I replied, my mind already racing with possibilities. There has to be something we can do. Sage shifted in her seat, her expression thoughtful. I might have an idea. I turned to her, skepticism etched into my features. What kind of idea? She hesitated, glancing around as if weighing her options. I know someone who might be able to help. A friend from my design days. He owes me a favor. I raised an eyebrow, the suggestion unexpected. And you trust this person? Sage nodded, her gaze steady. As much as I can trust anyone. It's worth a shot. It was a gamble, but with few options left, I knew we had to take it. Okay, let's do it. But Sage, if this goes south. I know, she replied, her voice firm. I won't let you down. We spent the next few hours making calls, pulling every string we could think of. Nolan stayed by my side, his quiet support a constant anchor. As the day wore on, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me, the stakes higher than ever. Finally, as the sun began to set, Sage returned with news. It's done. My friend agreed to help cover the costs, at least for now. Relief flooded through me, a small victory in the midst of the storm. Thank you, Sage. I know this wasn't easy. She shrugged, a hint of her old bravado returning. We're family, right? Gotta stick together. The words struck a chord, a reminder of the tangled web of connections that bound us all. Despite everything, we were family, and that meant something. As we sat in the waiting room, the tension slowly easing, I realized that the real battle had been fought not with fists or words, but with the choices we'd made. By coming together, we'd begun to dismantle the walls that had divided us for so long. But just as I thought we'd found a moment of peace, the doctor approached, his expression grave. "There's been a complication with Hank's surgery." My heart skipped a beat, fear clawing at my insides. "What kind of complication?" He hesitated, the weight of his words heavy in the air. "There's a risk of infection. We're doing everything we can, but it's critical." The room fell silent, the news a fresh blow. I felt Nolan's hand squeeze mine, his presence a lifeline in the storm. "We'll get through this," he murmured, his voice steady. I nodded, the resolve I'd found earlier hardening into something unbreakable. We'd come too far to back down now. Whatever it took, I would fight for my family, for the chance to build something new from the ashes of the past. As the night wore on, I realized that revenge and justice weren't about retribution, but about finding the strength to forgive and move forward. It was a lesson hard-earned, but one that would guide me as we faced the uncertain future together. The days following Hank's surgery were a blur of waiting rooms and whispered conversations. We took turns sitting by his bedside, each of us grappling with the reality of our situation. But amidst the uncertainty, something remarkable happened. We began to heal. Sage was surprisingly present, her usual bravado softened by genuine concern. She spent hours at the hospital, talking to Hank, even when he was too weak to respond. It was as if the crisis had stripped away her defenses, revealing a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. One afternoon, as we sat in the hospital cafeteria, Sage turned to me, her expression earnest. "I've been thinking a lot, Quinn. About everything." I nodded, sensing the weight of her words. "And I've started therapy," she said, her voice steady. "I know I've messed up, but I want to change. For real this time." The admission was unexpected, a glimmer of hope in the midst of chaos. "That's a big step, Sage. I'm proud of you." She smiled, a hint of relief in her eyes. "Thanks. I know it'll take time, but I want to make things right." We sat in companionable silence, the air between us finally free of tension. It was a small victory, but one that felt monumental. As Hank's condition improved, Lorraine and I found ourselves talking more, the barriers that had once divided us slowly crumbling. One evening, as we sat in the quiet of the hospital room, she handed me a worn envelope. "I found this in your father's things," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "I thought you should have it." I opened the envelope, my heart skipping a beat as I recognized my father's handwriting. The letter was a simple message, filled with his hopes for my future and his belief in my strength. It was the closure I hadn't realized I needed, a reminder of the love that had shaped me. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This means everything." Lorraine reached for my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "I'm sorry for everything, Quinn. I should have been there for you more." I squeezed her hand, a sense of peace settling over me. "We're here now. That's what matters." In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. The struggles and betrayals, the moments of doubt and fear, they had all led to this moment of understanding and forgiveness. As Hank recovered, we began to piece our lives back together, each of us committed to moving forward with a newfound sense of purpose. Nolan was a constant source of support, his presence a reminder of the life I was building beyond the shadows of my past. One evening, as we walked through the park, Nolan turned to me, a smile playing at his lips. "You've come a long way, Quinn." I nodded, the truth of his words resonating deeply. "We all have. It feels like a new beginning." He took my hand, the warmth of his touch grounding me. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As we continued down the path, I realized that the journey wasn't about revenge or justice, but about finding the strength to forgive and embrace the future. It was a lesson hard-earned, but one that would guide me as I navigated the complexities of life and family. But even as we moved forward, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that there were still stories left untold, questions lingering in the shadows. Sage's journey was just beginning, and I knew that her path to redemption would be fraught with challenges. Yet, I believed in her ability to change, to become the person she wanted to be. And as for me, I had found a sense of peace, a place where I belonged. I had learned to set boundaries, to protect my heart while remaining open to the possibilities of love and connection. In the end, the resolution wasn't about tying up every loose end, but about embracing the imperfections and uncertainties of life. It was about finding strength in vulnerability and hope in the face of adversity. As we headed home, the city lights twinkling in the distance, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For my family, for Nolan, and for the journey that had brought me here. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough.
The letter was nestled among the usual stack of bills and advertisements, its elegant script standing out against the mundane. I knew Ethan's handwriting anywhere, and the sight of it made my heart skip a beat. My name is Callie, and I've been a paralegal for over a decade. I've always prided myself on my ability to read between the lines, but nothing prepared me for the words that unfolded before me. Callie, it began, I have something important to ask you. Meet me tonight at our spot. Our spot was a quaint little restaurant by the river, where we first met 2 years ago. I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety bubbling up. Ethan wasn't usually one for grand gestures, so whatever he had to say must be significant. The day dragged on, each tick of the clock echoing the flutter of anticipation in my chest. As evening descended, I found myself at the restaurant, the soft glow of candlelight casting a warm hue over everything. Ethan was already there, his usual confident demeanor slightly frayed at the edges. He rose to greet me, his smile a bit too wide, his eyes not quite meeting mine. Callie, I'm glad you came, he said, pulling out a chair for me. There was a nervous energy in his movements, a telltale sign that something was up. We ordered our usual dishes, and as the waiter left, Ethan reached across the table, taking my hand in his. There's something I need to ask you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The anticipation in the air was palpable. He paused, seemingly searching for the right words. I've been thinking a lot about us, about our future. I want us to be together, Callie. Will you marry me? The question hung between us, suspended in the air like a fragile promise. My heart soared, but before I could fully savor the moment, he added, I know it's a big step, and there's something else. I want us to live with my mother, Lorraine, at least for a while. His words landed like a stone in my stomach. Lorraine was a formidable woman, deeply attached to Ethan and not shy about expressing her traditional views. I'd always sensed she saw me as an outsider, someone who might whisk her son away from her influence. I tried to keep my voice steady as I replied, Ethan, I love you, and I want to be with you, but living with Lorraine, are you sure that's what you want? He squeezed my hand, his gaze earnest. I know it's not ideal, but it's important to her. She's been lonely since Dad passed, and I think it'd mean a lot to her. Besides, it's just temporary. I nodded, though my mind was racing. Love was supposed to conquer all, right? But could it withstand the weight of Lorraine's expectations and my own need for independence? As we left the restaurant, Ethan's arm around my shoulders, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. The night was filled with the promise of a new chapter, yet I couldn't help but feel like I was stepping into a story where the ending wasn't mine to write. Back at my apartment, I replayed the evening in my mind. Ethan's proposal was supposed to be a moment of pure joy, but instead, it felt like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. I wanted to believe that love would smooth out the edges, but a part of me couldn't ignore the nagging doubt. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought about Lorraine. Her influence over Ethan was undeniable, and I couldn't shake the suspicion that this arrangement was more about her than us. I'd seen the way she looked at me, as if I were a threat to her carefully constructed world. The next morning, I woke with a renewed determination. I'd agreed to Ethan's plan, but I wasn't going to lose myself in the process. I'd find a way to make it work, to carve out a space for myself in a world that seemed increasingly claustrophobic. But as I prepared for the day, a thought lingered in the back of my mind. What if this was just the beginning? What if the real challenges were yet to come? And with that question echoing in my thoughts, I knew this was just the start of a journey that would test everything I believed about love, family, and justice. Moving into Lorraine's house was like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was pristine, but in a way that felt more like a museum than a home. The floral wallpaper, the antique furniture, even the ticking grandfather clock in the hallway, it all screamed of a time long past. I tried to make it feel like home, adding a few of my own touches here and there, but Lorraine's presence was everywhere. The first few days were filled with polite exchanges and forced smiles. I could sense Lorraine watching me, her eyes like a hawk's, always assessing, always judging. Ethan, oblivious or perhaps unwilling to see the tension, continued to assure me that things would settle down. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, Lorraine appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Callie, dear, I noticed you've been rearranging the kitchen. I'd appreciate it if you left things as they are. I have a system, you see." I nodded, swallowing the urge to argue. "Of course, Lorraine. I was just trying to make things more convenient." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Convenient for whom, I wonder? The question hung in the air, laden with unspoken accusations. I busied myself with the cutlery, pretending not to notice the weight of her gaze. Dinner was a quiet affair, the clinking of silverware the only sound breaking the silence. Ethan was engrossed in his phone, likely checking some financial report. Lorraine, however, seemed intent on maintaining the tension. "You know, Ethan," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet, "I was talking to Mrs. Harper today. She mentioned how important it is for a wife to support her husband's career, especially in these uncertain times." Ethan nodded absently, not catching the pointed look she shot my way. I felt my grip tighten on my fork, but I forced a smile. "I completely agree, Lorraine. It's a partnership after all." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she could see through my placating words. "Yes, a partnership. But some roles are more supportive than others, don't you think?" I bit back a retort, focusing instead on the salad in front of me. Ethan finally looked up, sensing the undercurrent of tension. "Mom, Callie's been a great support. She's always there for me." Lorraine's smile was thin. "I'm sure she is, dear." After dinner, Ethan and I retreated to our room, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. I could feel the frustration building, but I wasn't ready to confront it just yet. Instead, I focused on the small things, unpacking boxes, organizing our closet, trying to carve out a space that felt like ours. But the peace was short-lived. A few days later, I noticed some of my things had gone missing. At first, it was small items, a hairbrush, a book. I brushed it off, thinking I'd misplaced them in the chaos of moving. But then, my favorite necklace disappeared, and I knew something was amiss. It was during one of those quiet afternoons, when Lorraine was out, that I overheard Ethan on the phone with his sister, Tessa. His voice was low, urgent, and I couldn't help but strain to catch the words. "Tessa, you can't keep doing this. Callie's going to notice." There was a pause, and I could almost hear Tessa's voice on the other end, though the words were indistinct. "No, I haven't told her. But you need to stop. It's not fair to her." I stepped back, my mind racing. What wasn't fair? What was Tessa doing? My instincts as a paralegal kicked in, piecing together the fragments of conversation. Something was happening behind my back, and I needed to find out what. The revelation that Ethan might be hiding something from me was a bitter pill to swallow. It wasn't just about the missing items anymore. It was about trust, about the foundation of our relationship. And as much as I wanted to confront him, I knew I needed more information. That night, as Ethan slept beside me, I lay awake, formulating a plan. I would find out what was going on, and I would do it without tipping my hand. The stakes were too high, and I couldn't afford to act on impulse. The next morning, I put on my best game face, determined to play the part of the unsuspecting fiancé. But inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, determination. Whatever was happening, I was going to get to the bottom of it. I had a feeling that this was just the beginning, that the cracks in our foundation were deeper than I'd realized. And as I went about my day, I couldn't shake the sense that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The tension in Lorraine's house was like a taut string, ready to snap at any moment. The days dragged on, each one a careful balancing act between maintaining peace and uncovering the truth. I couldn't afford to let my suspicions fester any longer, so I took a bold step. While Ethan was at work and Lorraine was out for her weekly bridge game, I installed a hidden camera in the living room. It was a risky move, but I needed answers. That evening, as we sat in the living room, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. Lorraine was flipping through a magazine, her disapproval of modern fashions evident in her occasional tuts. Ethan was engrossed in a financial report, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Ethan," Lorraine said suddenly, her voice slicing through the silence, "have you spoken to Tessa recently? She mentioned she might stop by." Ethan glanced up, his expression guarded. Yeah, she said she might swing by this week. Why? Lorraine shrugged, her eyes never leaving the magazine. Just curious. It's been a while since we've all sat down together, you know. I watched Ethan closely, noting the slight tension in his shoulders. Something was definitely off, and I was determined to find out what. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I reviewed the footage from the camera. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold as I processed what I'd seen. Tessa had indeed come by, rifling through my things with a carelessness that spoke of entitlement. But it was the conversation between her and Ethan that truly shook me. Ethan, you've got to help me out, Tessa had pleaded, her voice tinged with desperation. I'm in over my head, and I need the money. Ethan had sighed, running a hand through his hair. Tessa, I can't keep covering for you. Callie's starting to notice things going missing. But you promised. Tessa's voice had risen, panic edging her words. You said you'd take care of it. Ethan had looked away, his face a mask of frustration. I'll figure something out, but you need to stop taking things. It's not fair to Callie. The betrayal cut deep, but it was the mention of money that intrigued me. What was Tessa involved in that required such secrecy? And why was Ethan enabling her? I decided to confront Ethan, but I needed to tread carefully. If I came on too strong, he'd shut down, and I'd be left with nothing but more questions. Later that day, as we sat in the living room, I broached the subject. Ethan, I've noticed some of my things have gone missing, I said, keeping my tone light. Do you think Tessa might have borrowed them? He stiffened, his eyes flickering to mine. Why would you think that? I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. I just thought maybe she needed them for something. You know how sisters can be. Ethan relaxed slightly, but there was a wariness in his gaze. I'll talk to her. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. I nodded, letting the matter drop for now. But inside, I was seething. His evasiveness only confirmed my suspicions, and I knew I needed to dig deeper. That evening, I called Simone my best friend and confidant. Her voice was a balm to my frayed nerves, grounding me as I recounted the latest developments. Callie, this is serious, Simone said, her voice firm. You can't let this slide. You need to confront him directly. I know, I replied, my mind racing with possibilities. But I need more information. I have a feeling there's more to this than just Tessa's antics. Simone sighed, her frustration palpable even through the phone. Just be careful, okay? You don't know what you're dealing with yet. As I hung up, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I couldn't let this go on. The longer I waited, the more tangled the web became. I needed to act, and soon. The next day, I decided to follow Tessa. It was a gamble, but I had to know what she was up to. I trailed her to a seedy part of town, watching as she entered a rundown building. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited, wondering what I'd find. When Tessa emerged, she was with a young woman I didn't recognize. They exchanged a few words before parting ways, and I caught a glimpse of the woman's face. She was striking, with vibrant eyes and an air of innocence. Something about her seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. As I drove home, my mind churned with possibilities. Who was this woman, and what was her connection to Tessa? And more importantly, how did she fit into the tangled mess that was my life? I knew I was getting closer to the truth, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. Whatever lay at the end of this journey, I was determined to see it through. Justice, revenge, or something else entirely, I'd find out soon enough. With the revelation of Tessa's theft and the mysterious woman still fresh in my mind, I knew it was time to confront Ethan. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when the ground beneath us was crumbling. But I needed to be strategic, to approach this with the same meticulous care I used in my work. That evening, as Ethan and I sat down for dinner, I decided to test the waters. Lorraine was out for the evening, and the house felt quieter, almost conspiratorial. I watched Ethan, noting the tension in his jaw, the way he fiddled with his fork. Ethan, I began keeping my tone casual. I ran into someone interesting the other day. A young woman. She seemed to know Tessa. He looked up, a flicker of something, panic, maybe, crossing his face before he masked it with a smile. Oh, Tessa knows a lot of people. True, I said, taking a sip of water. But this one seems special. I think her name was Violet. Ethan's hand stilled, his smile faltering. Violet? I don't think I know of Violet. His denial was too quick, too practiced. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, but I kept my expression neutral. Well, she seemed nice. Maybe she's new in town. Ethan nodded, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. I let the conversation drift to safer topics, but inside, I was boiling. He was lying to me, and I needed to know why. The next day, I decided to pay a visit to Simone. I needed her perspective, her unwavering support. As I sat in her cozy living room, the warmth and familiarity of our friendship wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. "Callie, you look like you've seen a ghost," Simone said, handing me a mug of tea. "What's going on?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's Ethan. I think he's hiding someone from me." I mentioned a woman named Violet, and he acted like he didn't know her, but I could tell he was lying. Simone leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "And this Violet, she's connected to Tessa?" "Seems like it." I saw them together, and Tessa seemed nervous. Simone nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You need to confront him, Callie. This isn't just about missing items anymore. It's about trust." I nodded, knowing she was right. But confronting Ethan was easier said than done. I needed to catch him off guard, to make sure he couldn't wriggle out of it with more lies. That evening, as Ethan and I sat in the living room, I decided to take the plunge. "Ethan, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked up, his eyes wary. "About what?" "About Tessa, about Violet, about everything." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze head-on. "I know something's going on, and I need you to be honest with me." Ethan's expression shifted, a mix of guilt and defiance. "Callie, it's complicated. Tessa's been having a rough time, and I've been trying to help her." "Help her how?" I pressed, my patience wearing thin. He hesitated, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. "She got involved with some people. I was just trying to keep her out of trouble." "And Violet?" I asked, my voice softening slightly. Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Violet's. She's a friend. She's been helping Tessa with some things." His vagueness only fueled my frustration. "Ethan, I need more than that. I need the truth." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I'm trying to protect you, Callie. I didn't want to drag you into this mess." I sat back, absorbing his words. Protect me? Or protect himself? The lines were blurred, and I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. As the silence stretched between us, I realized that this was a turning point. I had to decide whether to trust him or to dig deeper on my own. The stakes were higher than ever, and I couldn't afford to make a misstep. Later, as I lay in bed, my mind raced with possibilities. Ethan's words had only deepened the mystery, and I knew I couldn't rest until I uncovered the full truth. Whatever it took, I was ready to see this through to the end. And as I drifted into a restless sleep, a new resolve settled over me. Justice, revenge, protection, whatever my motivations, I would find the answers I sought. The game was far from over, and I was determined to win. The tension in the house was suffocating. Lorraine had returned from her evening out, her mood as icy as the winter air. I knew it was only a matter of time before she discovered Ethan's betrayal, and I had to act fast. I needed to expose the truth in a way that would leave no room for doubt or denial. I spent the next day meticulously arranging the evidence. I printed out emails and text messages, each one a piece of the puzzle that painted a damning picture of Ethan's infidelity. I placed them in a neat stack on the dining table, a silent testament to the chaos lurking beneath the surface of our lives. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I felt the weight of the impending confrontation pressing down on me. Lorraine was unusually quiet, her eyes flicking between Ethan and me, as if sensing the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Ethan, oblivious to the evidence awaiting him, was engrossed in his phone. I watched him, my heart a mix of anger and sadness. How had it come to this? How had we ended up on opposite sides of a battlefield I never wanted to fight on? "Ethan," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "there's something on the table you should look at." He glanced up, confusion clouding his features. "What is it?" "Just take a look," I replied, gesturing to the stack of papers. As Ethan picked up the evidence, Lorraine's curiosity got the better of her. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she read over his shoulder. The silence in the room was deafening, the air thick with anticipation. Ethan's face paled as he flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "Callie, what is this?" he demanded, his voice tinged with desperation. "It's the truth, Ethan," I replied, meeting his gaze head-on. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Lorraine's eyes were wide, her voice a whisper. "Ethan, is this true?" Ethan looked between us, trapped in a web of his own making. "Mom, I can explain," he started, but Lorraine cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I don't want explanations. I want the truth," she snapped, her voice cold and demanding. Ethan's facade crumbled, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Yes, it's true," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The room seemed to close in around us, the walls echoing with the weight of his confession. Lorraine's face was a mask of shock and betrayal, her control slipping away as the reality of her son's actions hit her. I watched the scene unfold, a part of me feeling vindicated, another part aching with the loss of what could have been. I had wanted justice, but the cost was higher than I'd anticipated. As Lorraine turned to me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and gratitude, I realized that this was a turning point. I had exposed the truth, but the consequences were far-reaching, affecting not just Ethan and me, but the entire family. "Callie, I didn't know," Lorraine said, her voice cracking with emotion. I nodded, understanding her pain all too well. "I know, Lorraine. I just couldn't keep it to myself any longer." The silence that followed was heavy, each of us lost in our own thoughts. But before I could process what had happened, a new revelation hit me like a freight train. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside, "I saw Tessa with a woman named Violet." "Who is she?" Ethan's eyes widened, panic flaring in their depths. "Callie, who is she, Ethan?" I pressed, my patience wearing thin. She's someone I met through work," he admitted, his voice shaking. I didn't mean for it to get this far. The admission hung in the air, a new layer of betrayal added to the already tangled mess. I felt my resolve harden, the need for justice burning brighter than ever. As the night wore on, I realized that my understanding of revenge and justice had shifted. It wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about finding a way to move forward, to reclaim my life from the wreckage Ethan had left behind. And as I lay in bed that night, the weight of the day pressing down on me, I knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I had the strength to see it through. The air was thick with tension as we gathered around the dining table for what would be an unforgettable family dinner. Lorraine had insisted on it, wanting to maintain some semblance of normalcy, though we all knew the evening was anything but normal. I watched Ethan, his face a mask of forced calm, as he picked at his food, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Lorraine, ever the matriarch, cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the silence. "Ethan, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." Ethan sighed, setting down his fork. "Mom, I've already explained." "No, Ethan," she interrupted, her tone firm. "You've made excuses. Now, I want the truth. All of it." The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as the weight of her words settled over us. I sat back, observing the unfolding drama, feeling both vindicated and heartbroken. This was the moment I had orchestrated, yet the reality of it was far more painful than I'd anticipated. Ethan hesitated, glancing at me, then back at Lorraine. "I messed up, okay? I made some bad decisions, but I was trying to fix things." "Fix things?" Lorraine's voice was incredulous, her disbelief palpable. "By lying to everyone? By dragging Callie into this mess?" Ethan's shoulders slumped, the fight leaving him. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." "But you did," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "You hurt all of us, Ethan." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and desperation. "Callie, save it, Ethan." I cut him off, the words sharper than I intended. "I'm done listening to your half-truths." The silence that followed was suffocating, each of us lost in our own thoughts. But before the tension could dissipate, the doorbell rang, shattering the fragile quiet. Lorraine rose to answer it, her movements stiff and mechanical. A moment later, She returned with Tessa in tow, her expression a mix of defiance and fear. "Tessa, what are you doing here?" Ethan asked, surprise and irritation lacing his voice. "I needed to talk to you," Tessa replied, her gaze darting nervously between us. Lorraine gestured for her to sit, her patience clearly wearing thin. "We're all ears, Tessa." Tessa hesitated, wringing her hands. "I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. I was just trying to help a friend." "A friend?" Lorraine echoed, disbelief coloring her tone. "What friend?" "Violet," Tessa admitted, her voice small. "She got into some trouble, and I thought I could help." The revelation hung in the air, a new layer of complexity added to the tangled web. I felt my heart sink, the situation spiraling further out of control. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched into his features. "Tessa, you should have told me. We could have figured something out together." "I didn't want to drag you into it," Tessa replied, her voice cracking. "I thought I could handle it on my own." The room was silent, each of us grappling with the implications of Tessa's confession. I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me, the enormity of the situation overwhelming in its complexity. As the evening wore on, the reality of our fractured family dynamics became painfully clear. Lorraine, once so sure of her influence, now seemed lost, her control slipping away with each new revelation. Ethan, caught in a web of his own making, was forced to confront the consequences of his actions. And Tessa, desperate for validation, had unwittingly dragged us all into her mess. I watched them, my heart heavy with a mix of emotions. I had wanted justice, but at what cost? The lines between right and wrong had blurred, leaving me questioning my own motivations. And as I sat there, surrounded by the debris of our once promising future, I realized that this was my lowest point. The path to resolution seemed impossible, the prospect of moving forward daunting in its uncertainty. But even in the midst of despair, a flicker of determination remained. I had come this far, and I wasn't about to give up now. I would find a way to navigate the chaos, to reclaim my life from the wreckage. As the night drew to a close, I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But I was ready to face them, armed with the knowledge that I had the strength to endure. Whatever came next, I would see it through, determined to emerge from the darkness stronger than before. The day began like any other, but I felt the tension in the air, an electric charge that promised change. I knew that today, everything would come to a head. Ethan had been avoiding me since the dinner, and Lorraine's silence was a testament to her shock and disappointment. I needed to confront Ethan, to make him face the consequences of his actions, and there was no more room for delay. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the living room, I gathered my resolve. I found Ethan in his office, surrounded by papers and the remnants of his once carefully constructed life. He looked up as I entered, his expression a mix of weariness and defensiveness. "Callie," he began, but I held up a hand, stopping him. "No more excuses, Ethan. We need to talk." He nodded, setting aside the papers. "I know. I've been a mess, and I'm sorry." "Sorry isn't enough," I replied, my voice steady. "You've hurt everyone around you, and it's time you own up to it." Ethan's gaze dropped, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I thought I could handle it, but everything spiraled out of control." I took a deep breath, the weight of the past weeks pressing down on me. "You need to fix this, Ethan. Not just for me, but for yourself." He looked up, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "I will. I promise." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, echoing through the house. We both froze, the unexpected interruption adding a new layer of tension. Lorraine answered the door, her voice carrying through the hallway. "Ethan, it's for you." Ethan and I exchanged a glance, then made our way to the door. Standing there was a stern-looking man in a suit, a folder clutched in his hand. "Mr. Caldwell?" the man asked, his tone professional. "Yes, that's me," Ethan replied, his voice wary. The man handed him the folder. "I'm here on behalf of the bank. We need to discuss the foreclosure proceedings." The words hit like a punch to the gut, the reality of Ethan's financial instability crashing down on us. Lorraine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Ethan took the folder, his hands shaking. "I thought I had more time," he muttered, flipping through the papers. The man shook his head. I'm afraid not. We'll need to resolve this matter quickly. As the man left, the silence in the room was deafening. Ethan stood there, the weight of his choices visibly crushing him. I watched him, feeling a mix of anger and pity. This was the moment I had been waiting for, yet it felt hollow. Ethan, I said softly, you need to face this. Running away won't solve anything. He nodded, his expression one of defeat. I know. Before he could finish, Tessa appeared, her face pale and drawn. Ethan, I heard. I'm so sorry. Ethan turned to her, his frustration boiling over. Tessa, this isn't just about me. You dragged us all into this mess. Tessa flinched, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to help Violet. Violet. Lorraine's voice cut through the tension, her confusion evident. What does she have to do with this? Tessa hesitated, then took a deep breath. Violet's been struggling, and I tried to help her, but it backfired. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. The room was silent, each of us grappling with the tangled web of lies and half-truths. I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me, the enormity of the situation overwhelming in its complexity. But as I looked around, a new resolve took hold. This was my chance to take control, to find a way forward. I stepped forward, meeting Ethan's gaze. Ethan, you need to be honest with everyone. It's the only way to start fixing this. He nodded, his expression one of determination. You're right, Callie. I'll do whatever it takes. The promise hung in the air, a fragile hope in the midst of chaos. As the reality of the situation settled over us, I knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The confrontation had brought us face to face with the themes of justice and redemption, forcing us to reevaluate our choices and motivations. And as I stood there, surrounded by the remnants of our fractured lives, I knew that we had the strength to rebuild, to find a new path forward. The journey wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it, armed with the knowledge that I had the power to shape my own destiny. Whatever came next, I would see it through, determined to emerge stronger and wiser than before. A few weeks had passed since the tumultuous events that had upended our lives. I had moved out of Lorraine's house and into a cozy apartment that overlooked a small park. It was a space that felt entirely my own, a sanctuary where I could begin to piece together the fragments of my life. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns on the hardwood floors. I sipped my coffee, savoring the quietude that had been so elusive in recent months. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Lorraine, asking if we could meet for lunch. I hesitated for a moment, then agreed. It was time for closure, for all of us. As I walked into the cafe, I spotted Lorraine sitting at a corner table, her expression a mix of anticipation and nervousness. She stood as I approached, greeting me with a tentative smile. Callie, thank you for meeting me, she said, her voice softer than I remembered. Of course, Lorraine, I replied, taking a seat. I think we both need this. She nodded, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. I wanted to apologize for everything. I was so focused on controlling the situation that I didn't see what was happening right under my nose. I shook my head gently. We all made mistakes, Lorraine. What matters is how we move forward. She smiled, a hint of relief in her eyes. Ethan's trying to make things right. He's working with the bank to sort out the financial mess, and he's seeing a counselor. That's good to hear, I said, genuinely pleased. He needs to find his own path, just like I did. Our conversation drifted to lighter topics, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace between us. Lorraine was still the formidable woman I'd always known, but there was a vulnerability there now, a willingness to change. As we finished our meal, Lorraine reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Thank you, Callie, for everything. You've been stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I smiled, squeezing her hand gently. We're all stronger than we think. After lunch, I took a leisurely walk through the park, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The path had been fraught with challenges, but each one had taught me something valuable about myself and the people around me. Back at my apartment, I found a note slipped under the door. It was from Violet. She wanted to meet to clear the air. I hesitated, memories of her involvement with Ethan and Tessa still raw. But curiosity won out, and I agreed to meet her at a nearby coffee shop. Violet was already there when I arrived, her camera slung over her shoulder. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mix of apology and hope. "Callie, I'm so sorry for everything," she began, her voice earnest. "I didn't know the full story. I never meant to cause any trouble." I studied her for a moment, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "I believe you, Violet. We were all caught up in something bigger than ourselves." She nodded, relief washing over her features. "I've been working on my photography, trying to find my own way. I'd love to show you some of my work." A small smile tugged at my lips. "I like that." As Violet showed me her photos, I was struck by her talent, the way she captured the world with a unique perspective. It was clear that she had found her calling, and I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that I had played a part in her journey. Our conversation drifted to future plans, and I realized that this unexpected friendship was a testament to the power of forgiveness and growth. We were both moving forward, carving out new paths from the chaos of our pasts. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a sense of closure settling over me. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had led me to a place of understanding and peace. I had faced the themes of revenge and justice head-on, and in doing so, had found a deeper sense of self. And yet, as I walked home, a lingering question remained. What would the future hold for all of us? The uncertainty was daunting, but it was also exhilarating. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, confident in my ability to navigate the complexities of life. The story wasn't over, but I was ready for the next chapter, whatever it might bring. With each step, I felt lighter, more certain of the path I was on. The future was wide open, and I was ready to meet it head-on, armed with the lessons of the past and the promise of a new beginning.